Chapter 13-14. The third commander of the Li family's sky guards was at the fifth sky of Nirvana realm. With a sneer on his face, he led 8 low-level Nirvana realm cultivators and quickly left the Li family. They boarded a flying ship and chased after Chu Mu at an extremely high speed. Li Qiufeng was the young master of the Li family. If there were no accidents, he would become the patriarch of the Li family. If he worked for the young master and left a good impression on the young master, he might be put in an important position in the future. The light broke through the sky and flew hundreds of meters in an instant, flying out of the Yen mountain boundary. Chu Mu was very vigilant while flying at high speed. He always felt that he was being watched. He didn't know where, but a pair of eyes had been watching him. This feeling of being watched appeared after he crippled a dozen of the Li family's henchmen and left. Chu Mu's nature was that of a swordsman, and the cultivation of a swordsman, in addition to swordsmanship, was the tempering of the 6 senses. He was much more sensitive than ordinary people and even swordsmen. He believed in his intuition, and until now, his keen intuition had never been wrong. No matter how fast he accelerated, the feeling of being watched followed him like maggots in a tarsal bone. He couldn't get rid of it. Chu Mu pretended not to know and just flew forward. Because he knew that if the person watching him had a purpose, they would show up sooner or later. Chu Mu's flying speed wasn't slow, but the flying ship was faster. About 300 miles away from the Li family, the Li family's flying ship caught up and directly crashed into Chu Mu like a meteorite. It was very fast and fierce. Once hit, it would more or less break bones. The flying ship was extremely fast. Chu Mu felt a strong sense of danger and hurriedly dodged to the side. The flying ship narrowly shot past him. The strong wind whistled, causing Chu Mu's robe to flutter and his long hair to flutter. Failing to hit its target, the shuttle-shaped flying ship stopped in midair. Next, several figures rapidly appeared from the flying ship and spread out to form an encirclement, surrounding Chu Mu. There was a total of 9 people, and every single one of them emitted the aura of the Nirvana realm, causing Chu Mu to be vigilant. The leader of the 9 people was a middle-aged man. His eyes were cold, and the aura he emitted made Chu Mu know that it was the aura of the 5th sky of Nirvana realm, which was 2 sky higher than him. He was a strong opponent. The aura of the other 8 people were all at the 3rd sky of Nirvana realm, which was the same as his cultivation. A member of the Li family? Chu Mu asked calmly. I'm the 3rd commander of the Li family's celestial guards. I'm here to capture you, the 3rd commander said sternly. His majestic appearance made it seem as if he was following the orders of the celestial emperor. The other 8 heavenly guards didn't look friendly. Their cold eyes seemed to pierce through Chu Mu's body. As a 1,000-year-old family, the Li family had a deep foundation. They had formed 2 groups of guards to protect the safety of the Li family. They were also in charge of external battles. One group was called the Guards. It was made up of divine condensation realm cultivators and was relatively ordinary. The other group was made up of Nirvana realm cultivators. There were fewer of them, but each of them had the cultivation of the Nirvana realm. Only a 1,000-year-old family would have such a group of guards made up of Nirvana realm cultivators. It wasn't a small matter to send out the heavenly guards to deal with Chu Mu. I'll give you 2 choices. 1. Surrender and follow us back obediently. We'll let the young master deal with you. The 3rd commander of the Li family's celestial guards sneered. 2. Let me break your limbs and bring you back for the young master to deal with. You choose. Chu Mu couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. What are you laughing at? One of the heavenly guards roared. I'm laughing at the fact that your Li family's 1,000-year-old heritage depends on 2 choices. Chu Mu said calmly, those people gave me the same 2 choices, but I chose the 3rd one. What 3rd one? One of the heavenly guards asked subconsciously. Chu Mu only smiled and didn't answer. The 3rd commander's face was gloomy. His eyes were like cold lightning as he stared at Chu Mu. Soon after, His face became even more ferocious. "You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit." Chu Mu laughed when he heard this. "Since you don't want to choose, I'll choose for you." The third commander waved his hand and pulled out his sword. The cold sword light was dazzling and sharp. Chu Mu moved. This was the first time he pulled out his sword after entering the deep blue world. It was also the first time the sky beheading sword showed its sharpness in the deep blue world. Just as the third commander of the Li family's celestial guards gave the order to attack, Chu Mu had already made the first move. The cold sword light was like a bolt of lightning that instantly pierced through the sky. Before anyone could feel their hearts palpitating, the dazzling sword light pierced through the sky. Just as everyone couldn't help but cover their eyes, a mournful scream tore through the void. With just one sword, Chu Mu had killed the Li family's celestial guard. They were both at the third sky of the Nirvana realm, but their strength was much weaker than Chu Mu's. The strength that Chu Mu displayed caused the expressions of the Li family's celestial guards and the third commander to change drastically. "Attack with all your might!" the third commander roared. The sword light suddenly trembled and exploded, turning into countless rays. It was like a torrential rain of locusts that surged towards Chu Mu, riddling him with thousands of holes. The other 7 heavenly guards also unsheathed their swords and used their sword techniques to attack Chu Mu. Chu Mu discovered that although these people's cultivations were at the Nirvana realm, and the weakest was at the third sky of the Nirvana realm, the sword techniques they used were at most at the middle or high tier of the Earth realm. Moreover, their attainments in sword techniques were ordinary. There was nothing remarkable about them. Sword techniques of this level wouldn't even be ranked in the 4 major star regions of the human race. They were even inferior to some spirit condensation realm swordsmen. As his figure flickered, Chu Mu easily dodged the opponent's sword attacks like a butterfly. He didn't deliberately use any powerful sword technique. He just used a basic sword technique that merged with the power of the law of thunder. His sword stabbed out like a bolt of lightning. In the sound of thunder, the shocking sword light flashed by. It was extraordinarily dazzling. Another mournful scream rang out. Another celestial guard was pierced between the eyebrows by Chu Mu's sword. His soul scattered and his body fell to the ground. "Damn it!" The third commander gritted his teeth. Every celestial guard was the main force of the Li family. They couldn't afford to lose even one. But now 2 of them had died. Even if they killed Chu Mu, it would be difficult to report back to the Li family. The third commander hated Chu Mu to the bone. He attacked with all his strength. A blue light instantly spread out from his body, covering an area of more than 1,000 meters. It enveloped Chu Mu. Chu Mu immediately felt the power of all kinds of laws being suppressed. This was the water force field. Among them, only the third commander could control the water force field. In an instant, a circle of red spread out from Chu Mu's body. It was the fire force field. The water force field collided with the fire force field. Chu Mu forcibly crushed the third commander's water force field. Moreover, it enveloped the third commander and the celestial guards. Instantly, they were all suppressed, and their strength was further weakened. The third commander's expression changed greatly. He quickly ordered everyone to spread out and use their technique. Almost every cultivator in the deep blue world cultivated a corresponding technique. In an instant, waves of water appeared out of thin air, roaring as they swept forward. Flames filled the air, and sand and stones were sent flying. Powerful techniques were used one after another. They could topple mountains and overturn seas, and they almost broke through the void. The power of the spells they cast was much stronger than the power of the sword techniques they cast. However, under Chu Mu's fire force field, the power of their techniques was greatly weakened. As Chu Mu dodged, the techniques all missed. He used his sword techniques to counterattack. A stab was like thunder, a slash was like splitting the earth, and a sweep was like sweeping through 1,000 soldiers. Every sword strike would take a life. Not long after, the 8 celestial guards all died under Chu Mu's sword. They were all at the third sky of Nirvana realm, but the techniques that the 8 celestial guards cultivated were worlds apart from Chu Mu's divine wilderness sword art. There was no comparison at all. In the end, only the third commander of the Li family's celestial guards was left. Chu Mu couldn't instantly kill a 5th sky of Nirvana realm cultivator without using his full strength. The reason why Chu Mu didn't use his full strength was because he felt that he was being targeted. This feeling had always been there, so in order to deal with any possible danger, he had to conserve his strength so that the other party wouldn't know about his background. Although he couldn't instantly kill them, Chu Mu still had the upper hand. The sword light seemed to be riding the wind and breaking the waves. It split the third commander's technique apart. It was incomparably sharp, fast like the wind, and fierce like thunder. The third commander's expression changed greatly. He never thought that with his 5th sky of Nirvana realm cultivation, he would be inferior to a 3rd sky of Nirvana realm cultivator. He also noticed that the other party had been using his sword technique and hadn't used any technique. The power of his sword technique was extremely tyrannical. It was unknown how many times stronger it was than theirs. If it was before, he would have wanted to capture Chu Mu alive and force him to reveal his sword technique. But now, he was only thinking about how to save his life. This was the biggest problem. Under the fire force field, the third commander's power was suppressed. His strength and speed weren't as good as Chu Mu's. Under Chu Mu's sword technique, the third commander had difficulty dodging, but it was also very difficult for him to counterattack. With another sword strike, the third commander's eyes were filled with a dazzling sword light that tore through the sky. One sword. Beheading, withdrawing the fire force field, Chu Mu descended and directly took the third commander's and the 8 sky guards' interspatial rings. These were his spoils of war. As for the other party's sword, he didn't care. It was ordinary and couldn't compare to the sky beheading sword. He didn't care about it. Zhao Fu communicated with the law of fire in his mental world and released a ball of flames, which then spread out and landed on the 9 corpses, burning them. The intense high-temperature flames quickly burned the 9 corpses, leaving only charred black corpses. The shuttle-shaped flying ship that the third commander had come on was now ownerless. Naturally, it became Chu Mu's spoils of war. After entering the flying ship, Chu Mu quickly scanned it. He discovered that this flying ship wasn't much different from the flying ships used by the human race. He could control it. He directly activated the flying ship and it rose into the air. With a whoosh, it exploded with astonishing speed and flew forward. Not long after Chu Mu left, a figure appeared. It was the old man from before. His gaze was deep as he looked at the charred ground below. His eyes were filled with unconcealable shock. A 3rd sky killing a 5th sky without any pressure. What a peerless genius! Chapter 13-15. Li Family. Young master, something bad has happened. A person hurriedly ran in and shouted anxiously. Why are you in such a hurry? Li Qiufeng was waiting for news from the third commander. He was displeased to hear this. The third commander's prayer beads are broken. The man hurriedly said. What? Li Qiufeng suddenly stood up, his face full of shock. The purpose of the prayer beads was to see life and death. A wisp of spirit was placed in the beads. If the person was alive, the beads would be fine. If the person was dead, the beads would break. The third commander's prayer beads breaking meant that he was dead. What about the other heavenly guards? Li Qiufeng hurriedly asked. 8 of them broke as well. Li Qiufeng sat down, stunned. This meant that the 8 celestial guards and the 3rd celestial guard commander were most likely dead. He wasn't thinking about how to deal with Chu Mu, but how to explain this matter. The heavenly guards were the strongest guards of the Li family. There weren't many of them, only 100 or so. They were led by 3 commanders. Every heavenly guard was important to the Li family. After all, it wasn't easy to nurture a Nirvana realm cultivator. Normally, the heavenly guards wouldn't be dispatched. Yet, this time, because of his own selfishness and simply because he didn't like Chu Mu and wanted to teach him a lesson, he ended up in such a situation. He originally thought that sending out the heavenly guards would solve the problem, but he didn't expect 8 heavenly guards and a commander to all be killed. Losing 1 or 2 heavenly guards was something he could suppress with his status as the young master. But losing 8 heavenly guards and 1 commander was something that even the patriarch had to account for. Damn Chu Mu, if it wasn't for you. Li Qiufeng's face was full of resentment. He blamed everything on Chu Mu and didn't think about his own problems. Trying to calm himself down, Li Qiufeng got up and walked outside. He wanted to tell the elders about this matter before they found out. Of course, he wanted to make Chu Mu's situation worse. The Li family patriarch, Li Zhenyuan, and the elders listened to Li Qiufeng's explanation. After listening to Li Qiufeng's explanation, Li Zhenyuan waved his hand and said, "Go back and prepare to head to the Skyblaze sect to cultivate." Li Qiufeng's expression suddenly changed. The Li family was somewhat related to the Skyblaze sect. In a sense, the Li family was attached to the Skyblaze sect. Compared to the Li family, which had a 1,000-year-old heritage, the Skyblaze sect was 10 times more powerful than the Li family from 3 years ago. With the Li family's ability and Li Qiufeng's talent, she would be heavily nurtured if she entered the Skyblaze sect. However, Li Qiufeng would have no chance of becoming the Li family's patriarch. Compared to those who only pursued strength, Li Qiufeng cared more about power. This was also the reason why he refused to join the Skyblaze sect and remained in the Li family. His goal was to inherit the position of patriarch of the Li family. But now Li Zhenyuan had made up his mind to let Li Qiufeng enter the Skyblaze sect. This meant that Li Qiufeng was not fated to be the patriarch of the Li family. This made Li Qiufeng hate Chu Mu even more. After making arrangements for Li Qiufeng, a cold light flickered in Li Zhenyuan's eyes. Patriarch, Chu Mu dared to provoke the dignity of the Li family. "We can't let him go," one of the elders shouted. "This bastard can kill 8 3rd Sky Nirvana Heavenly Guards and a 5th Sky Nirvana 3rd Sky Nirvana Heavenly Guard. His strength is not to be underestimated. Either we don't move or we kill him in one blow." "Don't give him any chance," Li Zhenyuan said firmly. "I haven't fought in years." The 5th elder stood up and laughed. His eyes flashed with a cold light and a bloodthirsty light. "Good, then the 5th elder will act. Capture this bastard and wait for his punishment," Li Zhenyuan said. "If the bastard resists stubbornly, the 5th elder can behead him on the spot and bring back his head." "Yes, Patriarch." The 5th elder chuckled, and the other elders smiled as well. "With the 5th elder acting, it's a cinch," the 3rd elder said. "The 5th elder's action can also intimidate the other families." A new crisis was approaching Chu Mu. The shuttle-shaped flying ship's speed was extremely fast. It streaked across the sky like a meteor and flew out of Yen Mountain's boundary. With the flying ship's speed and distance, it seemed impossible for the Li family's 5th elder to catch up to Chu Mu. After a few hours, the flying ship finally flew out of the Li family's territory and left Yen Mountain. At this moment Chu Mu was startled. A tyrannical aura penetrated the flying ship and fell on him, making Chu Mu shiver unconsciously. "Finally here?" Chu Mu stopped the flying ship and landed. He rushed out of the flying ship and released his tyrannical spiritual sense, which swept across the sky like lightning. A figure appeared in the range of his spiritual sense. The aura emitted from the figure let Chu Mu know that it was the one who had locked on to him. "Take my sword." The first word was still far away, but the second word was already nearing. A swift and fierce sword light was like a bolt of lightning. It was more powerful, faster, and more ferocious than the Li family's 3rd Celestial Guard sword. This sword technique caused Chu Mu to be greatly alarmed when it came stabbing towards him. With the heaven-rending sword in hand, it was as if it could split a mountain with a thunderous boom. When the two swords clashed, a tyrannical power shook the air and a piercing sound wave spread. Chu Mu's body trembled as he dispelled the rebounding force. He spun and the heaven-rending sword pierced out like a meteor. The sword light was incomparably fierce. With a flick of Chu Mu's wrist, the sword light poured down like a torrential downpour. Good sword art! With a loud shout, the attacker brandished his sword light. The sword light danced in the air. After blocking Chu Mu's sword light, he turned again and slashed down with his sword. The momentum was heavy, as if it could split a mountain. The sword body trembled. Under the power of the earthquake, the sword broke apart the opponent's sword and counterattacked. From the attacker's aura, Chu Mu knew that he was at least at the seventh sky of Nirvana stage. His attainments in sword art were far superior to the Li family's third celestial guard. Although he couldn't compare with Chu Mu, his cultivation far surpassed Chu Mu's. Even though Chu Mu had a powerful body transformation cultivation, he couldn't resist because the difference in cultivation was too great. The difference between the early third sky and the seventh sky was at least fourth sky. Sometimes, in the face of an absolute difference in strength, many skills were reduced to a joke. In the battle, Chu Mu gradually fell to a disadvantage, but with his exquisite sword art, he held on. He wondered if he should use his sword domain. With a difference of at least fourth sky, his sword domain might not be able to suppress his opponent. Not to mention, as they fought, Chu Mu felt that his opponent didn't seem to have any malicious intent. Although his sword art was swift and fierce, his attacks were fierce and merciless, there was no killing intent. Whether there was killing intent or not, Chu Mu could completely feel it. For a moment, he didn't understand what this person's intentions were. At first, he thought it was the Li family. Then he thought that his identity had been exposed and he was being hunted down. But now it seemed that it wasn't. As his thoughts raced, Chu Mu's sword art was endless. Although he was at a disadvantage because of the absolute difference in strength, he was tenacious and tenacious. Occasionally, he would counterattack once or twice, but it was wonderful to the extreme. It was like a stroke of genius, forcing his opponent to dodge or block. The more they fought, the more they felt the exquisiteness of Chu Mu's sword art. After all, the opponent's sword art attainments were obviously inferior to Chu Mu's. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't completely suppress Chu Mu. Regardless of whether the opponent had killing intent or what his purpose was, Chu Mu wouldn't give in. The ancient archaic sword art was displayed. The tyrannical ancient sword chi shot into the sky, startling the opponent. The earth-shaking force erupted, and the long sword vibrated at a high speed. The void couldn't withstand it, leaving only scratches that didn't disappear for a long time. The ancient archaic sword art under the earth-shaking force was very terrifying. The opponent was horrified. The sudden counterattack made him a little flustered. It was unknown whether the opponent was deliberately hiding it or the sword art was really like that. The opponent's sword art was still the same, and Chu Mu turned the tables on him. With a move of wind rising and thunder destruction, and then thunder prison breaking, he blasted the opponent more than 10 meters away. Stop! Just as Chu Mu was about to slash again, the opponent abruptly shouted. This person was an old man in a black robe. He was the one who had been following Chu Mu. Your Excellency's sword art is good. I'm ashamed of my inferiority. The old man laughed heartily. What do you want to say? Chu Mu slightly frowned, then immediately relaxed. The sky-beheading sword fell naturally as he stared at the opponent and said indifferently. Speaking of which, the opponent seemed to have limited his cultivation and didn't use his full strength. Your Excellency dared to challenge the dignity of the Li family. Let me see you in a higher light. To be able to kill 8 cultivators of the same cultivation level and a powerful enemy of the 5th sky of the Nirvana realm with your early 3rd sky of the Nirvana realm cultivation, I have a whole new level of respect for you. That's why I made a move to test you. Please don't blame me, the old man said with a smile. Your Excellency's cultivation level may not be high, but your sword art is exquisite and peerless. It's something I have never seen before. You flatter me. Chu Mu's reaction was very calm. Even if his sword art was placed in the 4 major galaxies of the human race, no one in the same generation could compare with him. In the deep blue world, which obviously didn't only cultivate the sword, it was needless to say. However, Chu Mu wouldn't be complacent. Although his sword art was unfathomable, his cultivation level wasn't high enough. Moreover, the cultivators in the deep blue world had also mastered technique. The power of those techniques seemed to be very strong and couldn't be underestimated. He believed that this black-robed old man in front of him must have also mastered technique. It was just that he hadn't used them yet. However, the Li family is a 1,000-year-old family with a deep foundation. They will definitely not let you go. The old man changed the topic. I'll deal with whatever comes my way. Chu Mu replied indifferently. Your Excellency is very bold. The old man praised. My name is Mu Shihua, and I'm the Vice Hall Master of the Sky-Bearing Academy. I see that Your Excellency's sword art is exquisite, and I would like to invite you to the Sky-Bearing Academy to be a sword art instructor. What do you think? Sword art instructor. Chu Mu came to a realization. So this was the old man's motive. His mind spun quickly as he weighed the pros and cons. My Sky-Bearing Academy isn't inferior to the Li family. If you become the sword art instructor of the Sky-Bearing Academy, the Sky-Bearing Academy will take care of the grudge between you and the Li family. The old man said as he waited for Chu Mu's decision. Chapter 13:16. The Kanglan Empire had a vast territory, and Yin Mountain was only one of them. The Sky-Bearing Academy was also one of them. The Sky-Bearing Academy faced the Kanglan River, and was backed by the Xiaku Mountain. It could be said that it was a place blessed by mountains and rivers. The Kanglan Empire was dominated by the imperial family and supported by the nobles. There were also various sects and clans. To a certain extent, all of them were dependent on the Kanglan Empire and respected the empire. The Sky-Bearing Academy was rather reputable in the Kanglan Empire and was not inferior to the 1,000-year-old Li family. It was no wonder that Mu Shihua dared to say that as long as Chu Mu was willing to be the sword instructor of the Sky-Bearing Academy, the Sky-Bearing Academy would take care of the grudge between Chu Mu and the Li family. This showed that the Sky-Bearing Academy had great confidence and was not afraid of the Li family. They could even suppress the Li family. The Li family was, after all, an aristocratic family with 1,000 years of history. They were extraordinary and could not be easily provoked. Mu Shihua, as the Vice Hall Master of Sky-Bearing Academy, was willing to let Sky-Bearing Academy and the Li family become enemies because of Chu Mu's sword technique. Mu Shihua had lived for more than 100 years, and as the vice-chairperson of the Sky-Bearing Academy, he had seen many sword experts who thought they were extraordinary. However, compared to Chu Mu, they paled in comparison. It was like comparing a firefly to the moon. It was indescribable that a 3rd Sky of Nirvana stage cultivator could go against an 8th Sky of Nirvana stage cultivator with just his sword technique. As the vice-chairperson of the Sky-Bearing Academy, Mu Shihua's eyesight was outstanding. One was sincere in his invitation, while the other had a need. Just like that, Chu Mu became the sword instructor of the Sky-Bearing Academy. Chu Mu's idea was to use the Sky-Bearing Academy as a starting point to integrate into the deep blue world. Furthermore, the Sky-Bearing Academy was different from the sects and clans. As the sword instructor, he could read many books and understand this world better. Along the way to the Sky-Bearing Academy, Mu Shihua introduced the history and current situation of the Sky-Bearing Academy to Chu Mu in detail. The founder of the Sky-Bearing Academy was a martial saint and was titled the Sky-Bearing Sword Saint. The Sky-Bearing Academy did not have much fame when it was first established, but under the Sky-Bearing Sword Saint's painstaking management, it gradually developed. After a few hundred years, it finally became a rather reputable academy in the Kanglan Empire. Ever since the Heaven-Bearing Academy had truly developed, The heaven-bearing sword saint had gone out to travel and left the heaven-bearing academy in the hands of the two vice-chairmen. Every time the vice-chairman's cultivation broke through the nirvana realm and reached the eternity realm, they would retire. Mu Shihua was the sixth-generation deputy chairperson. The other deputy chairperson was called Lin Yuan, who was also a sixth-generation deputy chairperson like Mu Shihua. However, Lin Yuan had assumed the position 10 years earlier than Mu Shihua. The Sky-Bearing Academy had two main departments, the Spell Department and the Sword Department. There were also other smaller departments such as the Pill Department, the Sword Department, and so on. The Spell Department and the Sword Department were the Tao of battle of the human race in the deep blue world. Under normal circumstances, the cultivators of the human race cultivated both the Spell Department and the Sword Department. However, some people focused on the Spell Department while others focused on the Sword Department. Of course, there were also cultivators who focused on the Spell Department and the Sword Department. For example, the founder of the Sky-Bearing Academy, the Sky-Bearing Sword Saint, was a cultivator who focused on the Sword Department. His attainments in the Sword Department were profound and profound. After reaching the Eternity Realm, he received the title of Sword Saint. However, there were too few cultivators who focused on the Sword Department and were able to achieve great result. This led to cultivators focusing on the Spell Department and the Sword Department as a supplement. The original Sky-Bearing Academy, because of the Sky-Bearing Sword Saint, focused on the Sword Department and the Spell Department as a supplement. However, ever since the Sky-Bearing Sword Saint did not care about the Academy and went out to travel, he had not returned for a few hundred years. Coupled with the fact that there were many cultivators who focused on the Spell Department, the Sword Department gradually declined. The current Sky-Bearing Academy focused on both the Spell Department and the Sword Department. According to Mu Shihua, the Vice Hall Master focused on the Spell Department and the Sword Department. Mu Shihua, on the other hand, focused on the Sword Department and the Spell Department. After hearing Mu Shihua's words, Chu Mu thought for a while and immediately felt that the Sword Department's standard in the Sky-Bearing Academy was only average. The Vice Hall Master who focused on the Sword Department could only be considered average in the Sword Department. Fortunately, Chu Mu's goal was not to learn any profound Sword Department, nor was it to improve his Sword Department. He only wanted to use the Sky-Bearing Academy as a springboard. The Sky-Bearing Academy had a good reputation and many students came because of its reputation. In order to avoid overcrowding, the Academy had its own rules. First of all, to become a student of the Academy, one had to have a certain level of talent, be it in the Sword Department or the Spell Department. Secondly, one had to pay a tuition fee to enter the Academy. Without a source of income, the Academy could not operate normally. Even with so many restrictions, the Sky-Bearing Academy had more than 10,000 students. These 10,000 students had different levels of cultivation. However, the lowest level of cultivation was at the Astral Realm, followed by the Spirit Condensation Realm, followed by the Nirvana Realm. According to the different levels of cultivation, the students were divided into 3 levels: the Black Palace students, the Earth Palace students, and the Heaven Palace students. This corresponded to the Astral Realm, Spirit Condensation Realm, and Nirvana Realm. Hiring a swordsmanship instructor was not a small matter. Mu Shihua did not have the final say in the Sky-Bearing Academy. He had to inform the other Vice Hall Master. Of course, this was a matter of face, so he had to inform the other Vice Hall Master. What? The head instructor of the Sword Department? After Mu Shihua introduced Chu Mu, he explained his goal. Lin Yuan immediately creased his eyebrows, and his tone seemed to be a bit unhappy. Chu Mu looked at Mu Shihua in surprise. On the way here, Mu Shihua said that he wanted Chu Mu to be the Sword Department instructor and not the head instructor of the Academy. The head instructor and instructor differed by one word, but the meaning was completely different. It was like the difference between an officer and a soldier. Furthermore, the academy referred to the entire academy and not just one of the academies. That's right. Young friend Chu's attainments in sword department are very profound. Even I admit that I am inferior to you, Mu Shihua said with certainty, which made Lin Yuan a little uncertain. He looked at Chu Mu deeply, as though he wanted to see through Chu Mu. Chu Mu looked very young and it was impossible to tell his exact age. However, he should be dozens of years old and was at the third sky of Nirvana realm. He could be considered a genius. However, Lin Yuan did not care about what Mu Shihua said about Chu Mu's attainments in sword department being so profound that even he admitted that he was inferior to him. Mu Shihua's attainments in sword department could be said to be one of the best in Sky-Bearing Academy. If he said that he was second, no one would dare to say that they were first. If Chu Mu knew what Lin Yuan was thinking, he would be speechless. He had already experienced Mu Shihua's attainments in sword department. It was indeed not bad, but it was only not bad. His cultivation was at the 8th sky of Nirvana realm. If such attainments in sword department were placed in the 4 great stellar domains, it would only be considered average. It was far from being comparable to Lin Yuan's. Lin Yuan had not even grasped sword force. After grasping sword force and cultivating it to a high level, Chu Mu realized that without understanding the essence of sword department and grasping sword force, one's attainments in sword department would always be limited. However, now was not the time for him to speak. Chu Mu stood motionless and did not say a word. He allowed Mu Shihua to explain. Brother Mu, the disciples of the Heaven Palace are all at the Nirvana realm. A few of them have exceptional attainments in sword department. This young friend's cultivation is only at the 3rd sky of Nirvana realm. Of course, if he can receive your praise, his attainments in sword department must be extraordinary as well. Why don't you take on the role of Earth Palace sword department instructor? What do you think? Lin Yuan said to Mu Shihua without looking at Chu Mu. Lin Yuan's words were belittling Chu Mu. However, Chu Mu did not mind. As long as the other party did not directly provoke him or violate his dignity, he would not be angry over such a small matter. After all, his temperament was not that bad. No, Brother Lin, I think that young friend Chu should be the head instructor of Earth Palace sword department. He has the ability to do so, Mu Shihua emphasized. All right, Brother Mu, it's decided then. Young friend Chu will take on the role of Earth Palace sword department instructor. He will be in charge of the 3 departments of Earth Palace sword department. We will talk about it in the future. Lin Yuan interrupted Mu Shihua's words and said decisively. In terms of seniority, he was older than Mu Shihua. In terms of strength, he was also stronger than Mu Shihua. Therefore, he felt that he had more authority than Mu Shihua as they were both vice-sect masters. Mu Shihua had never argued with Lin Yuan for anything. He was already used to it. However, this time, Mu Shihua still wanted to fight for it. This was because he knew how good Chu Mu's sword department was and had personally experienced it. Vice-sect Master Mu, I will take on the role of Earth Palace sword department instructor. Chu Mu said. Although he was not angry, Chu Mu could not be bothered to argue over the position of head instructor. Sky-Bearing Academy was just a springboard. Since Chu Mu had already spoken, Mu Shihua opened his mouth, but did not argue with Lin Yuan in the end. Young friend Chu, I'm really sorry to disappoint you. After leaving, Mu Shihua apologized on the way. He was also a little angry that Lin Yuan did not give him any face. Vice-sect Master Mu, you originally promised me the position of sword department instructor. Chu Mu smiled slightly, indicating that he did not mind. If I were to be the head instructor of sword department instructor, I would be afraid that I would not be able to do it. No, it is the Academy's loss to not let you be the head instructor of sword department instructor, Mu Shihua said solemnly. Let's talk about this in the future. Chu Mu did not want to continue discussing this topic as there was no need to. Vice Sect Master Mu, how are the 3 departments of Earth Palace Sword Department that I am in charge of? Since Chu Mu did not want to continue discussing this topic, Mu Shihua did not continue either. Instead, he turned to introduce the Earth Palace Sword Department to Chu Mu. Sky-Bearing Academy was generally divided into 2 major departments and 3 major palaces. The Spell Department and the Sword Department each had their own mysterious palace, Earth Palace and Heaven Palace. Each palace had its own branch. After all, there were tens of thousands of students in the academy, and it was impossible to gather all of them to teach Sword Department. The Mysterious Palace had the most students, with about 6,000 of them. The Earth Palace had the second most students, with about 3,000 of them. The Heaven Palace had about 1,000 of them. The Earth Palace was divided into 10 departments, with about 300 students in each department. Each department was taught by a Sword Department instructor. The previous Sword Department instructor of the 3 departments had to leave the academy for some matters and needed to be replaced. Chapter 13-17. Today was the day for the 3 sections of the Earth Palace Sword Technique class. 299 students of the Spirit Condensation Realm arrived at the 3 sections of the Earth Palace Sword Technique. As a force that surpassed the 1,000-year-old Li family, the Sky-Bearing Academy had a vast territory. Each section and palace had their own grounds and would not interfere with each other. Furthermore, the scenery was beautiful and the elemental energy was dense. It was a good training environment. The 3 sections of the Underground Palace Sword Technique were located beside the Jade Lake. The training hall was made of wood and the floor was also made of wood. In order to prevent it from being damaged, various seals were set up to protect the training hall from being damaged by external forces. The area of the training hall was vast and could accommodate thousands of people at the same time without feeling crowded. It was easy to accommodate only 299 people. The 299 students of the Spirit Condensation Realm sat cross-legged around the training hall. They were all familiar with each other and after sitting down in 2s and 3s, they started chatting. Some of them talked about the spells they had just mastered, some of them talked about everything under the sun, and some of them talked about nothing at all. Everyone, I received a piece of news. Do you want to hear it? Suddenly, a young man stood up and raised his hands to signal for everyone to stop talking. Jiang Yun, if you have something to say, just say it. Don't hide it. Not far away, a young man shouted. Speak. Quiet, quiet. Jiang Yun waved his hands to silence the commotion. According to the latest news I received, there is a new sword instructor for the 3 sections of the Earth Palace Sword Technique. TSK, I thought it was some new news. The original instructor of the 3 sections of the Earth Palace Sword Technique has left. We have one less sword instructor, so the academy will naturally hire someone else. Immediately, someone said in a disdainful tone. Everyone else also showed a disappointed expression. Don't be anxious, I'm not done yet. Being looked down upon by everyone, Jiang Yun hurriedly said and waved his hands. The new sword instructor this time is different. What's different? Tell us. Listen to me slowly. Jiang Yun revealed a smug look. As you all know, my uncle is a member of the Academy's Heavenly Palace's Sword Art Department, so my uncle has a basic understanding of the Academy's matters. This time, our new instructor is called Chu Mu. It is said that his cultivation is at the 3rd sky of Nirvana realm. He was personally invited back by Vice Sect Leader Mu when he was outside. It is said that Vice Sect Leader Mu wants this Chu Mu to be the head instructor of swordsmanship in the academy. The head instructor of the academy's swordsmanship. Jiang Yun's words immediately caused a commotion. As students of the academy, they knew very well what the position of the head instructor of swordsmanship was like. Simply put, in the Heaven-Bearing Academy, the Sect Lord was naturally the most respected. However, the Sect Lord, the Heaven-Bearing Sword Saint, had not appeared in the academy for hundreds of years. Occasionally, there would be news of him appearing in other places. Under the lord, there were 2 vice-lords. Of course, there were also some retired vice-lords. They had all broken through to the everlasting realm and became saints. They would only show up when the academy was in danger. These people's positions were no lower than the vice-lords. In fact, they were even higher. Under the vice-lords, it could be said that the head instructor of the academy was the most respected. The academy was divided into the spell department and the swordsmanship department. Naturally, there would be 2 head instructors and 1 vice-head instructor. Among them, there was already a head instructor for the spell department, but the position of head instructor for the sword department had been vacant for many years. Speaking of which, before Mu Shihua became the vice-lord, he was the head instructor of swordsmanship in the academy. The heaven-bearing sword saint had stipulated that the upper echelons of the academy could not hold multiple positions. After Mu Shihua became the vice-lord, the position of the head instructor of swordsmanship in the academy became vacant. Naturally, many people wanted to take up this position. However, the position of the head instructor of swordsmanship in the academy was extremely important. If one's swordsmanship was not good enough, not only would there be no benefits, it would also be embarrassing. It was important to note that Mu Shihua had been promoted from the head instructor of swordsmanship to the vice-lord. Lin Yuan had also been promoted from the head instructor of spells to the vice-lord. In short, most of the vice-lords of the academy were promoted from the head instructor. Being the head instructor meant that one could become the vice-lord of the academy in the future. For many people, this was a great attraction. It greatly increased the value of the position of the head instructor. The sword department of the mysterious palace had a total of 20 swordsmanship instructors. Among them, the one with the highest attainment in swordsmanship was known as the number 1 swordsmanship instructor. The Earth Palace had 10 swordsmanship instructors, and one of them was the number 1 swordsmanship instructor. Similarly, the Heavenly Palace had 10 swordsmanship instructors, and one of them was the number 1 swordsmanship instructor. Whoever became the head instructor of swordsmanship in the academy would be the leader of the 40 swordsmanship instructors, at least in name. In short, the position of the head instructor of swordsmanship in the academy was highly sought after. Many people wanted it, but they did not have the ability to do so at present. I heard that the number 1 swordsmanship instructor in the Heavenly Palace, Fang Shanhai, had applied for the position of the head instructor many times but was rejected. This time, Vice-Lord Mu invited an outsider to be the head instructor of swordsmanship. Will Fang Shanhai be angry when he finds out? Let's not talk about what Fang Shanhai thinks first. I'm very curious now. This new swordsmanship instructor, Chu Mu, is so capable that Vice-Lord Mu directly promoted him to the position of the head instructor of swordsmanship. Is he planning to cultivate an heir? Who knows? Maybe this new swordsmanship instructor's attainment in swordsmanship is really good. I don't think so. According to my uncle, this new instructor looks very young. I don't think he's much older than us, Jiang Yun said. At this age, even if he specializes in swordsmanship, his attainment in swordsmanship can't be too profound. How can he be the head instructor of swordsmanship in the academy? It's useless to say more. When the new swordsmanship instructor arrives, we'll find out. That's right. It's a pity that Chun-Li didn't come. Otherwise, it would be better if he did. Chun-Li's swordsmanship is profound. Even the previous instructor was no match for him in swordsmanship. It's inevitable that he's arrogant. Yes, Chun-Li is really a monster. His cultivation is similar to ours, but his attainment in swordsmanship is much higher than ours. Even the previous instructor couldn't teach him. No wonder he didn't come. It's better for him to practice swordsmanship on his own. This suggestion was immediately unanimously approved by the crowd. Chu Mu didn't know what these students were thinking. He left his residence and leisurely walked to the training hall of the 3 swordsmanship sects in the underground palace. The aura within the training hall was chaotic. With a slight differentiation, Chu Mu knew how many people were in the training hall. There were a total of 299 people. Mu Shihua had told Chu Mu that there were 300 people. In other words, there was still one person who hadn't arrived. However, Chu Mu didn't care at all. His duty was to spend 8 hours every 2 days to teach swordsmanship in the 3 swordsmanship sects. As for how many students came, he didn't care, because his true goal wasn't to teach here for the rest of his life. Chu Mu walked into the training hall. What entered his eyes were nearly 300 young faces. There were men and women. They all looked different, but they all looked good. The 299 students all looked at Chu Mu. So many gazes fell on Chu Mu's face, but Chu Mu didn't panic at all. His mind was calm and he seemed very calm. Even if a few hundred God Condensation Realm swordsmen gathered their aura together, they wouldn't be able to shake Chu Mu in the slightest. Hello students, my name is Chu Mu. I am your new swordsmanship instructor. If there are no questions, let's start today's swordsmanship lesson. Chu Mu calmly walked to an empty corner of the training hall and said very directly. This kind of straightforward attitude caused the students to be startled one after another. The new swordsmanship instructor seems to have a personality. Someone immediately transmitted a message. Indeed, he has a personality. I wonder how his swordsmanship is? As swordsmanship instructors, there were also differences in their swordsmanship. Otherwise, he wouldn't be known as the number 1 instructor. Instructor, I have a question. Immediately, a young female swordsman stood up and said, Speak. Chu Mu sat down cross-legged and replied plainly. Although he intended to use Sky Bearing Academy as a starting point and didn't want to stay here for too long, Chu Mu naturally had to do his job. He didn't intend to be perfunctory. Instructor, how old are you this year? The female student's question made Chu Mu flabbergasted, while the other students were clearly very interested. I am here to teach swordsmanship. Don't ask me anything that has nothing to do with swordsmanship. Chu Mu said very straightforwardly. Chu Mu's answer instantly made the students feel very bored. Instructor, since you don't want to answer this question, I have a very big question that I hope you can answer. Jiang Yun quickly stood up. Everyone looked at him, hoping that he would ask a sharp question to challenge the new instructor. Your new swordsmanship instructor, we don't know how good you are in swordsmanship and whether you are qualified to teach us swordsmanship. It had to be said that Jiang Yun's question was very direct and could be said to be sharp. It was like an unsheathed sword that directly pierced towards Chu Mu without mercy. Everyone's eyes instantly lit up. They all looked at Chu Mu with sharp gazes, wanting to see how Chu Mu would respond. Facts speak louder than words, Chu Mu said plainly. He stood up and walked to the center of the training hall. He faced Jiang Yun and said, If you have any questions about my swordsmanship, you can come up and spar with me. I will let you know. Okay. Jiang Yun immediately agreed. He was a little excited. He thought that if the new instructor's swordsmanship was average and defeated him, the academy would have to change another instructor to prevent him from misleading the students. If he was defeated, it would prove that the new instructor's swordsmanship was above his. However, if he was barely defeated, it would mean that the new instructor wasn't qualified to teach them swordsmanship. If he was easily defeated, it would mean that they had met an excellent instructor. That would be their lucky day. No matter what, knowing the standard of Chu Mu's swordsmanship wasn't bad for the students. On the contrary, it was beneficial. Jiang Yun walked out and stood opposite Chu Mu. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Chapter 13:18. Instructor, I won't be polite. Jiang Yun's eyes were filled with excitement as he unsheathed his sword. The sword light was as cold as autumn water, and the sound of the sword being unsheathed was pleasing to the ear. The bright sword light reflected in Jiang Yun's eyes, and his battle intent was like a spark that ignited a prairie fire, becoming more vigorous. The sound of air being torn apart rang out, the sword light was sharp, like a bolt of lightning piercing through the void, piercing towards Chu Mu. So fast! Jiang Yun's swordsmanship has improved again, the other students in the training hall exclaimed. They were all familiar with each other, and Jiang Yun was the type of person who loved to be in the limelight. Thus, they all knew of Jiang Yun's strength. Who would have thought that after not seeing Jiang Yun fight for a few days, his swordsmanship would improve again? But thinking about it, Jiang Yun's uncle was the instructor of the Heavenly Palace sword art. With him guiding Jiang Yun, it would be strange if he didn't improve. However, in Chu Mu's eyes, this sword that seemed exquisite was full of flaws. He only stretched out his hands, and the sharp sword light stopped in midair. Everyone's eyes widened, their pupils contracted, and their faces were filled with shock. Jiang Yun's sword was actually caught by the new instructor's 2 fingers. Jiang Yun exerted force, wanting to pull out his sword, but Chu Mu's 2 fingers were like cast iron, not moving in the slightest. No matter how much force Jiang Yun exerted, he couldn't move them in the slightest. Your swordsmanship is too weak, Chu Mu indifferently said, loosening his fingers. Jiang Yun exerted force once more, and immediately, he was sent flying backwards, falling on his butt. His face was flushed red, and his embarrassment turned into anger. You didn't even use your sword, Jiang Yun retorted. Of course, Jiang Yun's words weren't without reason. Even if one's swordsmanship wasn't high, as long as one's cultivation was high enough and their eyesight was sharp, they could still use their fingers to catch the opponent's sword. Then take this. Chu Mu faintly smiled. His finger was like a sword as it pierced towards Jiang Yun. Jiang Yun, who had just stood up, suddenly felt as if Chu Mu's finger had become a divine sword that had been unsheathed. It was so sharp that there was nowhere for him to hide. He couldn't even block it because he felt as if his thoughts had been frozen. He couldn't keep up at all and couldn't react at all. This finger, this sword, was too fast, too fast. It was incomparably profound. Jiang Yun seemed to have turned into a wooden puppet. Even his eyes were somewhat sluggish. That was because, even though he tried his best to react, he was still unable to keep up. The sword finger stopped at the center of Jiang Yun's brows. The terrifying sharpness penetrated through, causing Jiang Yun to involuntarily shudder. He only felt a piercing pain in the center of his brows. His brain felt waves of coldness, as though there were steel needles piercing into it. Jiang Yun's eyes were trembling, his heart was filled with fear. If they were enemies, then right now, he would already be dead, his soul scattered. Chu Mu retracted his finger. Jiang Yun's eyes were still sluggish. It took him a while to react, but his gaze towards Chu Mu had an additional tinge of respect. The other students more or less had some attainments in swordsmanship and had some eyesight. Naturally, they could tell that Chu Mu's finger was extraordinary. However, they didn't experience it as deeply as Jiang Yun. Therefore, their eyes were still filled with doubt. If anyone has any questions, you can come up and give it a try, Chu Mu faintly said. If there are no more questions, today's swordsmanship lesson will begin. Teacher, please give me your guidance, Jiang Yun respectfully said. He walked back to his seat and sat down with a sincere attitude. Jiang Yun's swordsmanship could be ranked in the top 3 among the 300 students. He was only slightly inferior to Chunli. His performance surprised everyone and made them even more doubtful. However, based on their understanding of Jiang Yun, they knew that even though he liked to show off, he was also arrogant. Therefore, they didn't challenge Chu Mu again. Chu Mu's first swordsmanship lesson in Sky Bearing Academy thus began. Let me ask you a question first. Why do you practice swordsmanship? Chu Mu asked. Of course it's to improve our abilities. Someone immediately answered. There were other answers, but in general, they were all for the sake of improving one's abilities. After all, in this world, the strong were respected. No matter how much wealth one had, one couldn't protect it without power. What is a sword? What is a sword? What is a swordsmanship? Chu Mu asked 3 questions in a row. The 299 students looked at each other. They didn't know that the so-called swordsmanship teacher started with these questions. What was the use of these questions? They didn't understand. According to past swordsmanship teachers, they would first demonstrate the swordsmanship, then explain in detail the techniques of the swordsmanship. Then, the students would ask questions and answer them one by one. Finally, the students would spar and point out their inadequacies. There had never been a swordsmanship teacher like Chu Mu. A novel teaching method might be refreshing, but no one felt that the questions raised by Chu Mu had any practical use. This was because their understanding of swordsmanship was too shallow. This was also a characteristic of the deep blue world, where both spells and swordsmanship were cultivated. Furthermore, spells were the mainstream. Teacher, may I ask if these questions have any use? Someone asked. Whether they have any use or not depends on how you interpret them. Chu Mu replied, now you can ask questions about swordsmanship one by one. I will answer them one by one. Chu Mu didn't explain the meaning of these questions, which made the students unhappy. However, Chu Mu's attitude was firm and he wasn't willing to explain. If they didn't understand, they didn't understand. Even if they explained, they still didn't understand. It would be a waste of effort. Jiang Yun first asked a question about swordsmanship, and Chu Mu immediately answered it. He went straight to the point and immediately made Jiang Yun feel enlightened. The immediate effect made the other students excited. They all raised their questions about swordsmanship, and Chu Mu answered all of them. Soon 8 hours had passed. In these 8 hours, Chu Mu answered all of the students' questions about swordsmanship. He ignored all of the questions that had nothing to do with swordsmanship. In these 8 hours, Chu Mu had left a deep impression on the students. The first impression was that Chu Mu was very strong, and he was a man of his word. The second impression was that he was very mysterious, which made people have a desire to explore him. The third impression was that he was very profound and knowledgeable in swordsmanship. At least for all of the students' questions, even if they were deliberately difficult, Chu Mu answered all of them. Moreover, most of the questions had immediate effect. In just 8 hours, people could understand a bit or even more than half of the questions. These 3 impressions were enough to make Chu Mu the focus of discussion among the students of the 3 sword divisions in the underground palace. Come, let's have a spar. I felt that I comprehended something just now. After the discussion about Chu Mu, the topic shifted to swordsmanship. The students all drew their swords and began to spar with swordsmanship. After 8 hours of swordsmanship teaching, Chu Mu left and went straight to the library. This was one of the reasons why he was willing to be a swordsmanship instructor in the school. Books recorded the development of a race and civilization. They recorded the history of a civilization's development. From books, one could effectively know the development of a race and civilization. Basically, swordsmanship would be taught once every 3 days. The rest of the time was free to be arranged. It was very sufficient. With the identity of a swordsmanship instructor, Chu Mu could enter the library at will to read the book. However, Chu Mu couldn't enter the upper levels of the library with his current identity. The books there were more important secret books. To Chu Mu, they weren't very useful. He only needed detailed information about the deep blue world. The most important thing was the location of the world spirit. After finding the relevant books, he sat on a chair in the library and started reading. After reading a few books, Chu Mu returned to his residence to cultivate. The instructor's residence was pretty good. It was a standalone unit with a sword practice room. It was very considerate. Now, Chu Mu's daily cultivation had an additional task. It was to comprehend the power of time. Among the various powers of heaven and earth, the power of time was the most important. Chu Mu had tried to comprehend it many times but failed. It was only until the hidden peak underwent a space-time transition and entered a space-time wormhole that he was able to comprehend the power of time by chance. However, after the space-time transition, the power of time stopped at the esoteric level. It was only a fine line away from the law. Now, what Chu-Mu needed to do was to try his best to transform the esoteric of time into the law of time. Once he mastered the power of the law of time, he would be able to use it in battle. Day after day passed. Chu-Mu had been in the Sky Bearing Academy for half a month as the instructor of the 3 sword techniques in the Earth Palace. In this half a month, he had taught a total of 4 sword techniques. Each time, he would spend 8 hours answering the students' questions, allowing them to spar and give pointers. Sometimes, he would personally spar with the students to point out the flaws in their sword technique. After Chu-Mu's 4 lessons, every student realized that their sword techniques had improved significantly. Today was the 5th time he had taught a sword technique. Chu-Mu also realized that there was an unfamiliar face among the students. It was a student who looked ordinary but had a unique temperament. When he opened and closed his eyes, they shone brightly and were as sharp as the edge of a sword. When Chu-Mu appeared, this student had been staring at Chu-Mu. "Instructor, my name is Chun-Li. I heard that your sword techniques are profound and unfathomable," Chun-Li said as he stood up and walked to the center of the training hall. His gaze was even sharper. "I only believe in the sword in my hand. Please give me some pointers." As he spoke, Chun-Li unsheathed his sword. There was a cold gleam on the tip of the sword. Chu-Mu knew who Chun-Li was. After all, as the instructor of the 3 sword techniques in the Earth Palace, Chu-Mu had some understanding of the students. According to what he knew, Chun-Li had an extraordinary level of attainment in sword technique. Even the previous sword instructor was inferior to him in terms of sword technique. This situation caused Chun-Li to be even more arrogant. He felt that the current sword technique instructors simply didn't have the qualifications to instruct him. This time, however, he had heard the other students talk about it a few times. Ultimately, he was interested and came to take a look, planning to have a sword duel with Chu-Mu. Chapter 13-19. With a flash of cold light, the sword in Chun-Li's hand rapidly pierced towards Chu-Mu. This sword strike was direct and concise. It already had a feeling of returning to simplicity. It faintly touched upon the essence of swordsmanship. Chu-Mu's eyes flashed with surprise. After staying here for a period of time, he had a general understanding of the level of swordsmanship of the students. Chun-Li's sword strike at this moment allowed Chu-Mu to see that his attainments in swordsmanship were much higher than Jiang Yun's. Even among his peers in the 4 great star domains, he could be considered quite good and ranked among the top. This meant that Chun-Li's talent in swordsmanship was above average. However, compared to Chu-Mu, this level was still too far away. A sword pierced over. In the eyes of the other students, it was as fast as lightning. Their faces were filled with shock, but Chu-Mu's expression didn't change. Even the crowd didn't see clearly how he attacked. The sword light flipped and Chun-Li stood in place blankly. His hand was empty. The sword was in Chu-Mu's hand, and the blade was resting on Chun-Li's neck. Chun-Li himself did not see how his sword was taken away or how it was placed against his neck. Each of them was as big as a fist, so big that it could fit in a fist. Chun-Li's swordsmanship was superb. Even the previous swordsmanship instructor was no match for him. Who would have thought that he wouldn't even have the slightest bit of resistance against this new swordsmanship instructor? He had used his highest level of swordsmanship, but his opponent had actually snatched his sword away and even placed it against his own neck. It had to be said that this was a great irony. From this, it also showed how amazing the new swordsmanship instructor's attainments in swordsmanship were. In an instant, the students who came back to their senses felt their blood boil. The swordsmanship of the new swordsmanship instructor had once again exceeded their expectations. The stronger and more profound the instructor's swordsmanship was, the more advantageous it was for them. With a slight tremble of his finger, the sword flew into Chun-Li's hand. However, Chun-Li did not return to his original position. He only stared at Chu Mu with a burning gaze, as if he wanted to melt Chu Mu. If Chunli was a beautiful woman, looking at Chu Mu like this would make him feel comfortable. However, Chunli was a man. "Student Chunli, please return to your seat," Chu Mu had to say. After bowing to Chu Mu, Chunli returned to his original position and sat down cross-legged, but his eyes were still blazing. "Let's begin today's swordsmanship lesson," Chu Mu said. Chun Li's challenge was just a small interlude. Chu Mu didn't mind it, but the other students' attitudes were even more sincere. This could be considered a good thing. Chu Mu began to explain Chun Li's sword move. He explained the profound techniques and essence within it to the students in an easy-to-understand manner so that they could all understand. After listening, Chun Li's understanding of his own sword move deepened. His eyes shone even brighter. Very quickly, under Chu Mu's guidance, 8 hours were up. This meant that the swordsmanship lesson had come to an end. Only the word, wanting to continue, could describe the feelings of the students. They had never thought that the cultivation of swordsmanship could be such a delightful thing. This was indeed the case. If they couldn't understand or practice it, their interest would naturally be greatly reduced. However, if they could quickly comprehend and be enlightened, it would make them feel happy and full of confidence. After the swordsmanship lesson ended, Chunli caught up with Chu Mu and said that he wanted to be Chu Mu's disciple and learn swordsmanship. However, he was rejected by Chu Mu. Although Chunli was a good seedling, Chu Mu's mind wasn't here. After going to the book collection department to read the relevant books, Chu Mu's understanding of the deep blue world deepened. Aside from the human race, there were 2 other races in the deep blue world. One was a race that was larger than the human race. They lived in the vast ocean and were called the sea race. The other race had the least number of people and was far inferior to the human race. However, even the large sea race didn't dare to underestimate them. This race was called the celestial race. There was more information about the sea race and less about the celestial race. This added a layer of mystery to the celestial race. Chu Mu didn't deliberately understand the sea race and the celestial race. There was no need for that at the moment. He mainly wanted to know the location of the world spirit. The sea race and the celestial race were only incidental. Apart from that, there was also information about spells. Spells was a general term. It was different from sword arts. It was a combat cultivation path. Between heaven and earth, there were all kinds of forces. They were called 3,000 in number. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, ice, thunder, cloud, light, shadow, blood, snow, stars, space, time, etc. They all existed between heaven and earth. They were a type of heaven and earth energy. The first experts of the deep blue world created different methods of application according to the different heaven and earth energy. After a long period of exploration and development, they gradually formed a more complete system. They were collectively called spells. The laws of spells were divided according to the different heaven and earth energy. They were divided into metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, lightning, and so on. Different spells had different ways of displaying them and different powers. To cultivate spells, one needed to first learn the seal technique. The basic seal technique was the prerequisite for all spells. After becoming proficient in the basic seal technique, one could then cultivate the seal technique of different spells. Using the heaven and earth energy one had grasped, one could draw the corresponding energy from the heaven and earth to achieve the goal of using spells. Out of curiosity, Chu Mu specially flipped through the books related to spells. He had a deeper understanding of spells and was even more amazed by the Tao of spells. This Tao was not inferior to the Tao of the sword at all. Finding the location of the world spirit was of utmost importance. However, there were bound to be others besides him. For example, the foreign races that had entered the deep blue world. During the search, there would inevitably be conflicts and battles. There would also be clashes with the native experts of the deep blue world. Chu Mu felt that it was necessary to understand technique. After all, only by knowing yourself and your enemy would you be able to emerge victorious in every battle. After understanding the wonders of spells, Chu Mu had the thought of cultivating spells. However, this was a distracting thought. As soon as it appeared, it was immediately cut down by Chu Mu's sword intent. Chu Mu was a sword master and a swordsman. What he pursued was the Tao of the sword. Sword Tao and Formula Tao were two completely different paths. Sword Tao focused on sword intent and sword skills. Heaven and earth energy was a type of support. Formula Tao, on the other hand, focused on heaven and earth energy. It had nothing to do with sword skills or sword intent. A person's energy was always limited. Moreover, the path of Sword Tao and Formula Tao was different. Originally, the path of Sword Tao had taken up too much of Chu Mu's time. He simply couldn't divert his attention to Formula Tao. Moreover, cultivating one type of spell wouldn't be of much help to Chu Mu's strength. Unless he cultivated a hybrid spell that was fusing different spells. For example, metal and water, fire and earth, wind and thunder, and so on. It was even possible to combine 3 spells. The power of a hybrid spell was far greater than a single spell. However, it was also more difficult to cultivate. After gaining a deeper understanding of techniques, Chu Mu felt that the Deep Blue World's cultivators had taken a wrong path. That was to cultivate both sword techniques and techniques at the same time. This was different from cultivating both body and chi at the same time. Perhaps at the beginning, cultivating both spell and sword Tao would allow one to have a considerable amount of strength in both close and long-range combat. However, it would be disadvantageous for the future because time and energy were limited. Of course, no one could say for sure what would happen in the future. Every world had its own civilization. Naturally, it would have its own path of development and couldn't be interfered with. Whether it would be good or bad in the end, no one could say for sure. Chu Mu wasn't from the Deep Blue World. He followed his own Tao. The sword was his Tao. Other than teaching sword skills once every 3 days, Chu Mu spent the rest of his time on daily cultivation and reading books. As time passed, Chu Mu gradually flipped through all the books in the lower level of the book collection department. Unfortunately, he didn't find any information related to the world spirit. It seemed that he had to either enter the upper level or leave Sky-Bearing Academy to search elsewhere. The profound of time was also being cultivated. It was on the verge of a breakthrough but lacked an opportunity. The power of the rules of space was naturally tempered by the void-breaking secret manual. The power of the 5 elements was also tempered by the 5 Elements Sutra. Chu Mu focused on cultivating the 5 elements' 7 mysterious technique. After diligent cultivation, he achieved another breakthrough and reached the 5th level. Only by reaching the 7th level could one enter the 2nd level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda. Chu Mu was working hard towards this goal. While Chu Mu was diligently studying the Deep Blue World, his reputation gradually spread. The source of the news was naturally the students of the 3 sword styles of the Earth Palace. Chu Mu's sword skills were unfathomable. It was the first time the students of the 3 sword styles of the Earth Palace had seen someone like him. Jiang Yun even believed that Chu Mu's sword skills were not inferior to his uncle's. To a certain extent, Chu Mu had already surpassed his uncle. One had to know that his uncle was the instructor of the Heavenly Palace Sword Arts. The standard of the Heavenly Palace Sword Arts instructor was definitely superior to that of the Earth Palace Sword Arts instructor. However, Chu Mu was an anomaly. The discussions of the students of the 3 sword styles of the Earth Palace caused Chu Mu to gradually gain some fame. In addition, when the students of the 3 sword styles of the Earth Palace sparred with the students of the other sword styles of the Earth Palace, they defeated their opponents with sharper and more concise sword skills. This caused their opponents to be surprised and learn more about Chu Mu's existence. After that, the news of Vice Sect Master Mu Shihua bringing Chu Mu back and suggesting that Chu Mu be the head instructor of the Earth Palace Sword Arts was dug up and spread. This caused Chu Mu's reputation to soar and he became the focus of attention. All sorts of rumors were spread. In addition to Chun Li's personal testimony, some people vaguely crowned Chu Mu as the #1 sword style instructor of the Earth Palace. Chun Li was a famous person in the Underground Palace's sword art department because he had defeated the previous sword art instructor. His talent made many people sigh in admiration. Therefore, when the current #1 sword style instructor of the Earth Palace, Wang Yefeng, heard this news, he frowned and was quite displeased. As the #1 sword style instructor of the Earth Palace, he had great authority in the Earth Palace sword arts department. This authority was not to be challenged by others, especially by a new sword style instructor. Therefore, Wang Yefeng sent a message to Chu Mu, requesting that Chu Mu come to see him. The underlying meaning was that he wanted to see what abilities Chu Mu had. Chapter 1320. Wang Yefeng, the #1 swordsmanship instructor in the Underground Palace. Someone passed the news to Chu Mu, but Chu Mu didn't intend to pay attention to it. No matter what Wang Yefeng's motive was, Chu Mu didn't want to have anything to do with him. The title of the #1 swordsmanship instructor in the Underground Palace was laughable in Chu Mu's eyes. However, even if Chu Mu didn't want to pay attention to it, Wang Yefeng wouldn't let it go. Today, it was Chu Mu's lesson again. In the Underground Palace's swordsmanship training hall, all 300 students were present. They sat cross-legged around the hall, waiting for their instructor to arrive. Unlike in the past, every time he attended a swordsmanship lesson, he would find it interesting, motivating, and impatient. When Chu Mu entered the training grounds, the gazes of the 300 students uniformly fell on Chu Mu's face, full of respect. "Hello, instructor." 300 voices sounded in unison. If other sword instructors saw this scene, they would be envious. "Hello." Chu Mu replied, "Today's swordsmanship lesson will be the same as before. I will answer your questions." There was a swordsmanship lesson every 3 days. After each lesson, every student would gain something. After 2 or 3 days of settling down, there would be new questions. The first to ask was Chun Li. Among the 300 students, Chun Li's swordsmanship was the best. The other students didn't understand the questions he asked. Chu Mu immediately answered them. His words were simple and easy to understand, making it easier for everyone to understand. Halfway through the lesson, an uninvited guest arrived. "Not bad, not bad. Instructor Chu's understanding of swordsmanship is indeed unique." A voice sounded, interrupting Chu Mu's explanation. The students' eyes fell on the uninvited guest. There were 4 of them. One of them was the leader. The 4 of them looked to be middle-aged men in their 30s or 40s. "You are?" Chu Mu glanced at them and asked. "This is the #1 swordsmanship instructor in the Underground Palace, Instructor Chu. Why aren't you coming over to greet him?" A middle-aged man shouted. Chu Mu came to his senses and realized that the one leading the group was the #1 swordsmanship instructor in the Underground Palace, Wang Yefeng. "It's my lecture time now. You can leave now," Chu Mu said bluntly. As soon as he saw Wang Yefeng, Chu Mu knew what kind of person he was. He was a man who was keen on power. Chu Mu was never interested in such people. And when Chu Mu was doing something, he didn't like to be disturbed by others. "Impudent!" The middle-aged man looked angry and shouted again. "I heard that you are a new sword instructor. Instructor Wang specially summoned you to take care of you. I didn't expect you to ignore him." Okay, maybe Instructor Chu is new here and is not familiar with the place. So he forgot about it for a while. Wang Yefeng waved his hand. "Did you hear that? Instructor Wang is so considerate of you. He even came to the training hall to see you personally. How can you not know etiquette? I really don't know how someone like you became an instructor." The middle-aged man seemed to be unforgiving. "Enough, Instructor Yang. You've gone too far." Wang Yefeng scolded unhappily. Chu Mu could see that these two people, one was playing the good cop, the other was playing the bad cop. As for the other two, they had a strange smile on their faces. Even the students could tell that the purpose of these people's visit was not good. My swordsmanship lesson originally had 2 hours left. Because of your interference, the time has decreased, Chu Mu said indifferently. Since he knew that the other party didn't have good intentions, he wouldn't be polite. What is your purpose? Tell me immediately. If you want to fight, I can satisfy you. If you don't have any purpose, leave now. Don't disturb my lecture. Chu Mu's words instantly caused the 4 sword-style instructors' faces to greatly change. As for the 300 students, they all looked at Chu Mu in shock. Their hearts couldn't help but emit a strong sense of excitement. As a new sword instructor, you are too rude. I will teach you a lesson. The middle-aged man who was noisy at the beginning roared and pulled out his sword light. It was like cold lightning cutting through the sky. It was incomparably sharp and slashed towards Chu Mu. The students suddenly exclaimed. Chu Mu didn't move at all. He didn't even blink, until the thunderous sword light slashed down, as if it was going to split Chu Mu in half. Chu Mu stretched out his hands and clamped. Suddenly, the sword light dissipated. The sword was clamped between Chu Mu's 2 fingers. He was motionless like a rock. The middle-aged instructor clenched his teeth and exerted force. However, he couldn't do anything. This scene was no different from when Jiang Yun attacked Chu Mu. Wang Yefeng and the other two's faces suddenly changed. Their eyes widened and their faces were filled with disbelief. Instructor Yang's swordsmanship wasn't weak, but his sword was clamped between Huang Xiaolong's 2 fingers. Moreover, Huang Xiaolong couldn't move his sword at all. Before they had time to think, Chu Mu's fingers trembled. An irresistible force was transmitted to them, shaking off Instructor Yang's palm. The sword in his hand was snatched away by Chu Mu. Then, Instructor Yang's sword slashed back. There was no way for him to dodge. His throat was pressed by Chu Mu's sword. The cold sharpness of the sword caused the pores on his neck to open. Instructor Yang's face changed. His eyes were filled with fear. Wang Yefeng, do you think that just because you are the number 1 sword instructor in the underground palace, I have to be respectful to you? Chu Mu moved his sword away, pointing it at Wang Yefeng. A shocking sharpness was transmitted to Wang Yefeng. Wang Yefeng's hair stood on end as an uncontrollable sense of danger swept through his body. His muscles were numb, and his blood felt like it was about to freeze. In my eyes, you can't even be considered as an opponent. Chu Mu continued, causing Wang Yefeng to be both shocked and angry. If you don't believe me, you can draw your sword. I guarantee that I won't kill you. Wang Yefeng wanted to draw his sword and stab a hole in Chu Mu's body, but he didn't dare to. He was very clear about the pressure that Chu Mu exerted on him. He couldn't move at all. His heart was filled with fear and anger. As the number 1 sword instructor in the underground palace, he was pointed at by a new sword instructor. Moreover, he didn't dare to resist. This kind of humiliation almost drove Wang Yefeng crazy. His eyes turned red, and the anger in his eyes seemed to want to burn Chu Mu to ashes. On the other hand, the students were overjoyed. Their eyes were shining. This was their instructor, too impressive, too domineering. Instructor Chu, please put down your sword. We came here with good intentions. We apologize for disturbing Instructor Chu's class. We will leave now. The other 2 instructors saw that something was wrong and immediately tried to appease Instructor Chu. Get out. Chu Mu wasn't polite at all. If you have any dissatisfaction, I will take it all. However, be prepared to be killed. After saying that, Chu Mu's eyes emitted a cold light. The killing intent was so thick that it couldn't be dispersed. It was like an aurora shooting into Wang Yefeng's eyes. Wang Yefeng's body trembled, and his pupils dilated. He felt as if he saw a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. It was as if he saw Azura's purgatory. The terrifying killing intent made his heart tremble. In terms of experience, Wang Yefeng and Chu Mu were like heaven and earth. In terms of the number of powerful opponents they had killed, there was no comparison. After frightening Wang Yefeng, Chu Mu flicked his wrist. His sword flew up and returned to the scabbard of the sword instructor surnamed Yang. The four of them didn't have the face to stay any longer. They hurriedly turned around and left. In this place, they had lost all face. "Teacher, you're too impressive. Especially that sentence, 'I guarantee that I will not kill you.' It is simply indescribable." After Wang Yefeng and the other three left, the 300 students were in an uproar. Chu Mu didn't expect that a casual sentence from him would cause such a commotion among the students. He also didn't expect that the students would learn this sentence and use it so often that it spread throughout the sky-bearing academy. "Alright, there is not much time left. Let's continue." Chu Mu suppressed the discussions of the crowd and said in a clear voice. With regards to Wang Yefeng and the others, Chu Mu didn't care at all. The reason why he was so domineering was because he didn't want more trouble. If trouble came knocking on his door, if he dealt with it in a low-key manner, there might be even more trouble. Being domineering would cause people to shrink back. Those small fries shouldn't jump around. Chu Mu was only interested in experts. Chu Mu continued with his sword technique lesson. As for Wang Yefeng and the other three who left the training hall, they were all enraged. Other than anger, Wang Yefeng's eyes were also filled with fear. When he faced Chu Mu's killing intent, he felt as though he was going to die. It was as though his soul was sinking into a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Wang Yefeng wasn't someone who would admit defeat. He knew that Chu Mu was a terrifying existence and shouldn't be provoked easily. However, it didn't mean that he wouldn't seek revenge. Especially today, he had embarrassed himself in front of the 300 students. He had completely lost his dignity as the #1 sword technique instructor in the underground palace. He could imagine that today's incident would definitely spread among the students of the 3 sword technique departments. It would be a huge blow to his reputation. However, at that moment, Wang Yefeng couldn't think of a way to deal with Chu Mu. As expected, after Chu Mu's sword technique lesson ended, the students were still discussing the incident when they left. Not long after, the news spread to all the sword technique departments in the underground palace. One person spread to 10 and 10 to 100. More and more people knew about the incident and Chu Mu's existence. Even the instructors of the spell department knew about it. However, they didn't pay much attention to it. The strength of the instructors of the spell department had always been higher than the instructors of the sword department. Therefore, the instructors of the spell department didn't pay much attention to the instructors of the sword department. This new instructor has gone overboard recently. The #1 sword technique instructor in the Heavenly Palace, Fang Shanhai, frowned when he heard the news. As the #1 sword technique instructor in the Heavenly Palace, Fang Shanhai knew about Chu Mu's arrival. He also knew that Mu Shihua wanted to appoint Chu Mu as the head instructor of the sword technique in the academy. However, Lin Yuan suppressed the idea. Because of this, Fang Shanhai didn't go looking for trouble with Chu Mu. After all, Chu Mu was only an instructor of the sword technique in the underground palace. He posed no threat to Fang Shanhai. However, Fang Shanhai seemed to be in high spirits now. Chapter 13:21. Come here and I promise I won't kill you. When Chu Mu walked out of the book collection department and was about to return to his residence, he heard these words and was startled. Such a familiar phrase. Wasn't it the one he casually said that day? After returning to his residence, Chu Mu first practiced a sword art, then the divine desolate sword arts, then the star calamity cultivation method, comprehending the power of time, and finally the 5 elements 7 profound arts. As more and more people spread the news, Chu Mu's name became more and more resounding. Yen Mountain Li family. Still no news. Li family patriarch Li Zhenyuan asked in a low voice. Patriarch, Chu Mu went missing after leaving Yen Mountain territory, but the family's informants are searching everywhere for him. That day, the Li family's fifth elder moved quickly but still couldn't stop Chu Mu. Chu Mu left with Heaven-Bearing Academy's vice-sect Lord Mu Shihua for Heaven-Bearing Academy. Besides the two of them, no one else knew and there was no news about them. 8 heavenly guards and a heavenly guard commander died under Chu Mu's sword. To the Li family, this was a great loss, but an even greater loss was the Li family's prestige. As the hegemon of Yen Mountain's territory, a 1,000-year-old family, the Li family had absolute authority in Yen Mountain's territory. Its prestige flourished, lasting for 1,000 years, intimidating all powers within Yen Mountain's territory. Even some outside Yen Mountain's territory didn't want to provoke a 1,000-year-old family like the Li family. Over the years, it wasn't that no one dared to provoke the Li family, but without exception, they were all buried by the Li family, becoming stepping stones for the Li family's prestige. The more powerful the Li clan was, the fewer people who dared to provoke the Li clan. It had already been more than 10 years since anyone dared to provoke the Li clan. Of course, there were still many clans that were more powerful than the Li clan in the Kanglan Empire. However, the Li clan knew their limits and wouldn't provoke those clans that were more powerful than them. This time, they had been provoked by a junior of unknown origin, crippled in front of everyone, and then killed 8 heavenly guards and 1 heavenly guard commander. This was a blow to the Li family's prestige. No matter what, they had to find Chu Mu, capture him alive, and bring him back to the Li family for trial. While taking revenge, they also had to prove that the Li family's dignity was inviolable. It was a pity that Chu Mu had entered Sky-Bearing Academy and they could not find him. Family head, we have news. Chu Mu has entered the Sky-Bearing Academy to become the sword arts instructor of the Earth Palace. Underground Palace sword technique instructor. Li Jinyuan revealed a cold smile. Is the news true? After confirmation, it is true. Very good. A sword technique instructor from the Earth Palace only has an ordinary status in the Sky-Bearing Academy. Inform the 5th Elder to bring the Heavenly Guards to the Sky-Bearing Academy and bring back Chu Mu. Li Jinyuan laughed coldly as his eyes flashed. Yes. The messenger left immediately. Soon, the 5th Elder of the Li family brought 10 Heavenly Guards and left the Li family on a flying ship, heading towards the Sky-Bearing Academy. 5th Elder, after capturing Chu Mu, please let me teach him a lesson. One of the Heavenly Guards gritted his teeth as he spoke. His eyes were filled with anger and hatred. If you want to teach him a lesson, do it when we return to the Li family. The 5th Elder said, we will not let off anyone who dares to provoke the Li family and cause us to suffer losses. In the hearts of the 5th Elder and the 10 Heavenly Guards, Chu Mu was already a prisoner. After all, even though the Sky-Bearing Academy was powerful, it was not that much stronger than the Li family. No matter what, the Sky-Bearing Academy had no reason to become enemies with the Li family over a sword technique instructor from the Earth Palace. What they did not know was that Chu Mu's Earth Palace sword technique instructor was very different from an ordinary one. Welcome, welcome. The 5th Elder of the Li family brought 10 Heavenly Guards to the Sky-Bearing Academy. The people of the Sky-Bearing Academy received them and informed the Vice Hall Master, Mu Shihua. In fact, Mu Shihua had instructed them to inform him directly if anyone from the Li family came. As the Vice Hall Master, Mu Shihua had a lot of power. The people of the Sky-Bearing Academy naturally obeyed his orders. Please forgive us for our sudden visit, Vice Hall Master Mu. The 5th Elder of the Li family smiled. In the early years, he was infamous. However, after keeping a low profile for more than 10 years, he had cultivated his character. After becoming an elder, he was more tactful in his words and actions. Everyone, please take a seat. Mu Shihua greeted everyone and smiled. May I know why the 5th Elder has come to the Sky-Bearing Academy? Mu Shihua could roughly guess why the fifth elder of the Li family brought 10 heavenly guards to the sky-bearing academy. However, he did not say it directly. In his opinion, there would be trouble sooner or later. Why should he waste time feigning civility? I heard that there is an Earth Palace swordsmanship instructor called Chu Mu in the sky-bearing academy. The fifth elder's temperament did not suit him to pretend to be elegant. Beating around the bush was his personality. Yes, Mu Shihua admitted directly. He knew that since the fifth elder of the Li family came personally, he must have confirmed the news. Vice Hall Master Mu, please don't laugh at me. Some time ago, more than 10 people from the Li family were crippled by a thief. 8 heavenly guards and 1 heavenly guard commander were killed. The fifth elder said. The 10 heavenly guards were furious. This thief is Chu Mu, the swordsmanship instructor of the Earth Palace of the Sky-Bearing Academy. The head of the Li family sent me here to bring back Chu Mu and give the Li family an explanation. I'm afraid that won't do. Chu Mu is the swordsmanship instructor of the Sky-Bearing Academy. He is a member of the Sky-Bearing Academy. Mu Shihua's tone was very firm. There was no room for negotiation. The fifth elder's expression changed. This was different from what he had expected. Vice Hall Master Mu, the Li family has suffered a great loss this time and our reputation has been damaged. Now that we know that the culprit is here, we did not capture him directly because we do not want to be enemies with the Sky-Bearing Academy. The fifth elder's tone became stiff. I also hope that the Sky-Bearing Academy will not become enemies with the Li family because of a mere swordsmanship instructor from the Earth Palace. The Sky-Bearing Academy has the obligation to ensure the safety of every instructor. Mu Shihua's tone also became stiff and impolite. Mu Shihua, you are provoking a strong enemy for the Sky-Bearing Academy. The fifth elder stood up abruptly and shouted. Strong enemy? Where is he? Mu Shihua's eyes were indifferent as he asked with a cold smile. The fifth elder was stunned for a moment before he became furious. His aura rose rapidly like an invisible flame. Mu Shihua's words meant that the Li family was not qualified to be called a strong enemy of the Sky-Bearing Academy. You want to fight? I know what kind of person you are. If you fight now, I won't be surprised at all. However, when that time comes, none of you will be able to leave this place alive. Mu Shihua's tone was not threatening at all, but it caused the temperature in the air to drop. The fifth elder's body trembled and the anger on his face gradually subsided. He knew that Mu Shihua was very strong and was not someone he could deal with. Even if the 10 heavenly guards attacked together, they would not be able to kill Mu Shihua. On the other hand, this was the Sky-Bearing Academy. If they were to fight, they would definitely be surrounded by the experts of the academy. I will pass on your words to the head of the Li family. The fifth elder's chest heaved violently. After he calmed down, he snorted and turned to leave the reception room. The 10 heavenly guards followed behind him angrily. Mu Shihua stood up and watched the fifth elder and the other 11 people leave the Sky-Bearing Academy. In reality, if Chu Mu was only a normal underground palace sword technique instructor, Mu Shihua wouldn't have stood out so forcefully. However, Chu Mu's sword technique attainments were something Mu Shihua had personally experienced, and he knew how powerful it was. As for Chu Mu's strength, he also knew that killing a 5th stage Heavenly Emperor as a 3rd stage Heavenly Emperor was no pressure at all. Previously, Mu Shihua had also mentioned that the Sky-Bearing Academy had taken care of the grudge between Chu Mu and the Li family. That was why such a scene had occurred. Mu Shihua originally did not intend to tell Chu Mu about this. However, after thinking about it, he felt that he should let Chu Mu know. Thank you, Vice Sect Leader Mu, Chu Mu said. This is what I should do. Mu Shihua said, the reason I'm telling you this is to make you more vigilant. This time, the Li family came openly, but I firmly rejected them. I don't think they'll let this go. Therefore, you might be assassinated. You have to be careful. I will be careful, Chumu said. However, he secretly thought that it would be fine if the Li family did not send anyone. If they sent someone to assassinate him, he would make sure that they would not be able to return alive. The Li family's fifth elder, who had failed his mission, had a gloomy face that was as dark as the bottom of a pot. His eyes were bloodshot and extremely frightening. The 10 heavenly guards were also furious. Fifth elder, what do we do now? One of the heavenly guards asked. The fifth elder was so angry that he didn't answer. Should we return to the family and report this matter, or? Another heavenly guard said. I think we should stay here and find a suitable opportunity to sneak into the sky-bearing academy. We can ambush Chumu and capture him alive, the third heavenly guard suggested. The fifth elder gradually suppressed the anger in his heart. After hearing the heavenly guard's conversation, he started to think. He had a fiery temper and was also the kind of person who would attack at the slightest disagreement. However, after being an elder for more than 10 years, he had learned to think with his head. This was his mission. He was very unhappy that he did not complete it the last time. If he did not complete it the second time, he would be very dissatisfied, not to mention the family. After thinking for a while, the fifth elder decided not to return to the family first. Instead, he would capture Chumu and bring him back to the Li family for trial. After making the decision, the fifth elder immediately ordered the heavenly guards to gather information and understand the terrain of the sky-bearing academy. Most importantly, they wanted to know where Chumu was and his usual habits so that it would be easier for them to take action. In order to avoid alerting Chumu and the attention of the sky-bearing academy, it was best to be discreet when gathering information. It would be best if they did not sneak in personally. This would undoubtedly take a lot of time. However, as long as they could capture Chumu, everything would be worth it. Chumu didn't know the Li family's fifth elder's idea, but with Mu Shihua's reminder, Chumu would normally be even more vigilant. With his sixth sense and strength, it wouldn't be easy to deal with him. Chapter 1322. I have already finished reading all the books in the lower levels of the book collection department. My understanding of the deep blue world has deepened a lot, but I still haven't found any information related to the world spirit. Chumu thought to himself as he walked back to his residence. However, he didn't feel disheartened. The location of the world spirit had always been very secretive. If one's level wasn't high enough, they wouldn't be able to find out. Now, I can either enter the upper levels of the book collection department of the Sky-Bearing Academy or leave the Sky-Bearing Academy and search for information in other places. Chumu pondered and decided to find a way to enter the upper levels of the book collection department. If he left now, he wouldn't know where to start searching. The main problem was that the world spirit was too mysterious. As the days passed, the Li family's fifth elder and the others also found out where Chumu was and when he would be active. They were ready to take action. At night, Chumu was cultivating in his residence. 2 black figures sneaked into the Sky-Bearing Academy and silently headed towards Chumu's residence. Chumu, who was cultivating, suddenly had a bad feeling, as if danger was approaching. He stopped cultivating. Chumu pondered for a while and felt that something was about to happen. Perhaps they were worried that they would disturb Chumu and allow Chumu to be prepared. The 2 people who sneaked in didn't release their spiritual sense. With his outstanding senses, Chumu sensed that there were 2 people approaching him. They didn't know that they had already been exposed. They sneaked into Chumu's residence without being detected by anyone in the academy. The goal of these 2 people was to capture Chumu alive. They thought that their actions were secretive enough and wouldn't be discovered by Chumu. Suddenly, a strand of blazing light lit up in the darkness, and it was like an aurora that tore through the night sky. It was extremely gorgeous, dazzling, and extremely breathtaking. It was the glow of a sword that tore through the night sky, tore through space, and stunned the 2 of them. One of them reacted rather quickly. A blazing sword light blossomed like a blazing sun as it shot towards Chu Mu. The other person's reaction was slightly slower. He had just pulled out his sword and was about to blossom when Chu Mu's sword was already in front of him. There was no way to dodge or block. As the sword came, the blazing sword light was dyed red. Damn it! The angry roar was accompanied by an even more powerful sword light. It was as if a huge fireball was crashing down from the sky like a meteor. The terrifying aura caused Chu Mu's residence to almost shatter. The powerful aura spread out and alerted Mu Shihua's residence. Who dares to behave atrociously in the academy? Mu Shihua rushed over quickly. His huge spiritual sense surged like a tidal wave. After his sword missed, the attacker felt the huge spiritual sense crushing towards him. He knew that he had been exposed and couldn't do anything to Chu Mu. Since he couldn't do anything about it, he quickly retreated. Just as he rushed out of Chu Mu's residence, "You think you can leave after coming here? You are looking down on the sky-bearing academy." Mu Shihua rushed over and unsheathed his sword. An incomparably sharp sword light streaked across the sky like a meteor streaking across the horizon as it attacked. Mu Shihua's sword was incredibly sharp and powerful, and the attacker was sent flying. He coughed up a mouthful of blood and unleashed a secret technique, causing his speed to increase by many times. Mu Shihua chased after him, refusing to let him go. After a while, Mu Shihua returned. "Instructor Chu, I'm sorry." He escaped. Mu Shihua said apologetically. "No, Vice Peak Lord Mu, I should be thanking you for coming." Indifferently said Chu Mu. "You are the sword instructor of the academy," Mu Shihua said. His eyes were cold. "Although I didn't catch up, I know who he is." As he spoke, he looked at the face of the person who was killed by Chu Mu. It was one of the 10 heavenly guards who came with the Li family's 5th elder. "Instructor Chu, I will ask the Li family for an explanation for this," Mu Shihua said. "I'll have to trouble Vice Peak Lord Mu," said Chu Mu. Mu Shihua left and took the corpse of the Li family's heavenly guard with him. Chu Mu stayed in his residence. After thinking for a while, he continued to cultivate. He had a feeling that the grudge between him and the Li family wouldn't end so easily. Even if Mu Shihua intervened, it would still be the same. Therefore, increasing his own strength was the most important thing. Under the cultivation of the 5 elements technique, Yi Futian's 5 elements technique made another breakthrough. The 6th element. Back then, Chu Mu had cultivated in the 5 spirits' secret tower for several months before reaching the 4th element. He was stuck, so he left. After coming to the outside world, as his knowledge increased and he dabbled in sorcery, his understanding of the 5 elements technique and the 7 elements technique deepened. The bottleneck disappeared, so he could improve faster. The 6th element was only a step away from the 7th element. The next day, Chu Mu went to another sword instructor class. Mu Shihua took the corpse of the Li family's heavenly guard and went to the Li family. He wanted to settle the score with the Li family. This was a story for later. Chu Mu didn't ask too much. In fact, the Li family's attitude towards Mu Shihua's questioning was very tough. Not only did they not give an explanation, but they also reprimanded Mu Shihua for harboring their enemy, Chu Mu. Mu Shihua almost made a move in the Li family, but his rationality prevailed over his impulse. Although he was strong, he was not strong enough to deal with the Li family. Especially in the Li family's residence, he didn't have the geographical advantage. Moreover, although Mu Shihua said that he would help Chu Mu deal with the Li family's grudge, it was most likely for him and not the sky-bearing academy. Lin Yuan would definitely not agree, unless something unexpected happened. This matter was put aside for the time being. The Li family wouldn't do anything for the time being. After Mu Shihua returned to the sky-bearing academy, he started to get busy. The Kanglan dynasty's triennial exchange was about to begin. This exchange was held in the sky-bearing academy. As the host, the sky-bearing academy had to take care of everything. The Academy Exchange was not only an opportunity for the academies to interact with each other, but it was also a great opportunity to promote the reputation of the academies. This was especially true for the academies that were hosting the exchange. They had the home ground and had the advantage. Mu Shihua and Lin Yuan had no choice but to do their best. In a short period of time, the decorations in the sky-bearing academy became more elegant. Chu Mu also noticed these changes and understood a little, but he wasn't interested. Cultivating and attending classes, he finished reading all the books in the lower level of the book collection department. Since he couldn't go to the upper level for the time being, Chu Mu spent all the time reading books on cultivation, especially on the 5 elements and 7 mysteries. There was no bottleneck after the 6th mystery. As Chu Mu cultivated, he continued to improve steadily. He wasn't far from the 7th mystery. Chu Mu also didn't give up on comprehending the power of time. However, he was still stuck and couldn't break through as he wished. He couldn't rush it. Mu Shihua was very busy, Lin Yuan was also very busy, and the upper echelons of the Sky-Bearing Academy were all very busy. Chu Mu was very free and cultivated as usual. The Li family didn't make any more moves. Chu Mu also gradually let it go. However, it was only temporary. He had a feeling that the Li family wouldn't let it go so easily. If they came again, the trouble would be even bigger. At that time, the Sky-Bearing Academy might not be willing to take the blame for him, and Mu Shihua might not have the ability to do so. Time flew by, and the Kanglan Empire's exchange was getting closer. Chu Mu's cultivation of the 5 elements and 7 mysteries was also getting closer to the 7th mystery. Today, after the lecture, Chu Mu returned to his residence and cultivated the 5 elements and 7 mysteries again. He felt that the breakthrough of the 5 elements and 7 mysteries would happen during this period of time. In his spiritual world, the power of the 5 elements shone with a magnificent light under the cultivation of the 5 elements and 7 mysteries. In particular, the 5 elements sutra circulated on its own, causing the cultivation of the 5 elements and 7 mysteries to contain the principle of mutual generation of the 5 elements, increasing the cultivation efficiency. This time, Chu Mu went into seclusion for a short period of time. After a day and a half, the power of the 5 elements in his spiritual world suddenly shone brightly. The strong light overshadowed the light of the other powers in his spiritual world. Even the light of the power of the spatial laws was suppressed and became dim. In Chu Mu's mind, many mysteries and applications regarding the 5 elemental power appeared out of nowhere, further deepening his understanding and control of the 5 elemental power. After a while, the light of the 5 elements' power of the 5 elements dimmed. Compared to before, every ray of the 5 elements' power of the 5 elements was more perfect and flawless. There was a layer of light circulating around it. The power of the 5 elements' power of the 5 elements had reached the late stage of the subtle realm, which was on par with the power of the spatial laws. However, because he cultivated the 5 elements and 7 mysteries, Chu Mu's understanding and application of the 5 elements' power of the 5 elements were better than those swordsmen in the ancient god world who had also reached the late stage of the subtle realm. As he wished, the power of the 5 elements' power of the 5 elements' power of the 7 mysteries had been cultivated. It's time to enter the 5 spirits' secret pagoda again, Chu Mu thought to himself. However, before entering, he had to inform Mu Shihua. After all, this time, Chu Mu did not know how long he would stay in the 5 spirits' secret pagoda. He had to inform Mu Shihua in case he could not find him if something happened. However, Chu Mu would not tell Mu Shihua where he was really going. He only said that his cultivation had reached a critical point and he needed to go into seclusion for a period of time to make a breakthrough. As for how long he would be in seclusion, he was not sure yet. It's a pity. I wanted to let you participate in the Academy Exchange, Mu Shihua sighed after hearing Chu Mu's words. He had personally experienced Chu Mu's swordsmanship and was very clear about it. Therefore, he felt that letting Chu Mu participate in the exchange would definitely be a good thing for Sky-Bearing Academy. However, since Chu Mu wanted to go into seclusion to make a breakthrough, he had no reason to disagree. As for the students of the 3 Earth Palace sword techniques, I'll have to trouble you to inform them, Chu Mu said. Alright, I'll make the arrangements. You can go into seclusion and make a breakthrough as soon as possible, Mu Shihua said with a smile. Alright, I'll take my leave first, Chu Mu said. He got up and left quickly. He did not return to his residence, but went out of Sky-Bearing Academy. After finding a secluded place, he released his spiritual will. When no one noticed him, he activated the 5 spirits' secret order. Instantly, his body was enveloped by a 5-colored light. Following that, it shrunk rapidly and disappeared in a flash. Chapter 1323. It was like jumping through space like 1,000 years, but also in an instant. Before Chu Mu could react, he had already arrived at the first level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda. A familiar aura, a familiar environment, and a familiar place. However, Chu Mu did not come here to lament. His goal was to enter the second level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda. How can I enter the second level? After pondering for a while, Chu Mu activated the power of the 5 elemental rules and released his aura. Immediately, the power of the 5 elemental rules on the first level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda gathered together and appeared in 5 different forms around Chu Mu. A golden light that was as sharp as a sword, a green tree that grew endlessly, a river that flowed endlessly, a ball of flame that burned fiercely, and a piece of thick earth that could support all living things. The power of the 5 elemental rules, 5 different forms, 5 different auras were released continuously and filled the first level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda. Chu Mu was trying to enter the second level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda. At that moment there was a fluctuation in the air above the first level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda. Chu Mu looked up. The 5 different forms of the power of the 5 elemental rules flew up into the air and collided with each other before exploding. A 5-colored halo appeared and spun like a nebula whirlpool. A 5-colored nebula whirlpool. The entrance to the second level? Chu Mu guessed. He stared at the nebula whirlpool for a while before leaping up into the sky. The divine wilderness sword essence surrounded his body, and the sword aura strengthened as he charged into the nebula whirlpool. Without being attacked or in any danger, Chu Mu easily passed through the 5-colored whirlpool and landed on the ground. The whirlpool disappeared. The second level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda. Although it did not look much different from the first level, Chu Mu could tell that the second level was smaller than the first level. Similar to the first level, the 5 corners of the second level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda had a ball of light. Gold, green, blue, red and brown. Every ball of light emitted an intense fluctuation. It was the pure fluctuation of the power of the 5 elemental rules. Looking at the 5 balls of light of different colors, Chu Mu's eyes burned with passion. Previously, when he was on the first level of the 5 spirits pagoda, he had obtained the inheritance of the 5 elements 7 mystery technique and the 5 elements force fields from the 5 light balls. He wondered what kind of inheritance the 5 light balls on the second level of the 5 spirits pagoda would have. He strode toward the golden ball of light and stepped into it without any resistance. In an instant, Chu Mu was surrounded by a golden light. Streams of information continuously surged into his mind. Waves of energy also continuously surged into his body, circulating along his meridians. As Chu Mu absorbed the information, he could feel the enormous energy contained within the golden torrent. Surprised, he hurriedly circulated the divine desolate sword art and the astral calamity cultivation technique. He cultivated both his chi and body to absorb the energy. When he received the inheritance on the first level, there was only the 5 elements 7 profound technique and the 5 elements force field. There was no energy. He didn't expect the second level to have energy. Both energy and information were absorbed, and the golden ball of light was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. As for Chu Mu's cultivation, it was also rapidly increasing. After coming to the deep blue world for over half a year, he hadn't stopped cultivating. It was just that his progress was slow. He was still at the early third firmament of the nirvana stage. It wasn't easy to increase his cultivation, but now he was rapidly approaching the middle stage. The golden ball of light was completely absorbed by Chu Mu. His chi and body cultivation both increased. Chu Mu checked the information in his mind. Just like the first level, there were two types. The first was called the 5 Elements Sharp Metal Sword. It was an absolute art, an ordinary absolute art. The second was a magical art. It was a basic seal technique and metal art. Chu Mu couldn't help being speechless. Chu Mu was very interested in the ordinary 5 Elements Sharp Metal Sword. However, he wasn't interested in the metal arts because he had already made his decision. However, Chu Mu discovered that he seemed to have grasped a bit of the metal arts inheritance. Extending his left hand, his fingers moved nimbly, forming one basic seal technique after another. With this inheritance, Chu Mu was able to train the basic seal techniques that normal cultivators would need to spend a lot of time to master to a proficient level. Magical arts were the combination of the basic seal technique. Using one's own heaven and earth energy to communicate with the heaven and earth energy in the outside world, they formed all kinds of magical art. Chu Mu used the metal arts inheritance to form seals with his fingers. Suddenly, a golden light appeared on one of his fingers. He gently swept it through the air, leaving behind a resplendent golden scar. It emitted a shocking sharpness. This was a type of metal arts called metal incisor. It was a low-grade metal arts, the lowest grade metal arts. Chu Mu only used it once out of curiosity. He no longer paid attention to the so-called metal art. He had to admit that if the others in the deep blue world knew about this, they would be extremely jealous. The metal arts inheritance was many times better than comprehending and cultivating from scratch. Chu Mu was too lazy to pay attention to it. Everyone has their own ambitions and pursuit. He just treated it as an eye-opener. As for the ordinary 5 Elements razor-sharp metal sword, it wasn't that easy to master. Even with Chu Mu's extraordinary perception, he couldn't learn it in a short period of time. Therefore, he didn't use it and walked towards the green light. He walked into the green light, absorbed the wood elemental energy, and received the wood elemental inheritance. After a while, the green wood elemental energy was completely absorbed by Chu Mu. He discovered that his cultivation had increased from the early third sky of nirvana stage to the middle third sky of nirvana stage. In addition, Chu Mu began to organize the information in his mind. Similar to the metal arts inheritance, there were two types of wood arts inheritance. The first type was called the 5 Elements Greenwood Sword. It was an ordinary art. The difficulty of cultivating it was the same as the 5 Elements razor-sharp metal sword. The second type was a new set of basic seal techniques and wood art. Chu Mu, who tried the metal arts, didn't try the wood arts. He wasn't interested and didn't force it. Next, Chu Mu walked towards the blue light. After a while, he absorbed the blue light and obtained two types of inheritances. The first type was the 5 Elements flowing water sword. Just like the previous two types, it was an ordinary art. The second type was a new set of seal techniques and water art. He looked at the remaining red and brown light balls. If he was not mistaken, there should be a corresponding ordinary secret technique, a new basic seal technique, and a corresponding spell technique in each of these two light balls. Indeed, within the red ball of light, Chu Mu obtained the normal 5 Elemental Raging Flame sword and a new basic seal technique, as well as a fire technique. In the brown light cluster, Chu Mu obtained the ordinary 5 Elements Thick Earth sword and a new set of basic seal techniques and earth arts. Although he didn't deliberately understand, Chu Mu also discovered that the 5 sets of basic seal techniques obtained from the 5 inheritances were a complete set of basic seal techniques, including all kinds of simple and complex seal technique. But what Chu Mu cared about the most was the 5 ordinary arts and the skyrocketing cultivation. After absorbing the 5 energy clusters, his qi cultivation and body cultivation had both reached the late stage of the 3rd sky of Nirvana realm. He was only one step away from the peak. In fact, if he only used the 5 energy clusters for qi cultivation, he could reach the peak of the 3rd sky of Nirvana realm and continue to absorb them after reaching the 4th sky of Nirvana realm. But Chu Mu divided them and used them separately to increase his qi cultivation and body cultivation. After dividing them, he could reach the late stage of Nirvana realm and was only one step away from the peak. This meant that as long as Chu Mu spent some time to cultivate properly, he would definitely be able to break through to the peak of the 3rd sky of Nirvana realm. Then, after consolidating for a period of time, he would be able to undergo the 4th Nirvana and break through to the 4th sky of Nirvana realm. Then, another piece of information flowed into Chu Mu's mind. The content of the information was how to enter the 3rd level of the 5 Spirits' Secret Tower, which was the last level of the 5 Spirits' Secret Tower. Chu Mu had already obtained such powerful inheritances on the 1st and 2nd levels of the 5 Spirits' Secret Tower. He didn't know whether there would be more powerful inheritances on the 3rd level of the 5 Spirits' Secret Tower. However, the way to enter the 3rd level was different from the way to enter the 2nd level. Only with great strength could one enter. According to the information, the way to enter the 3rd level of the 5 Spirits' Secret Tower was to defeat the 5 Spirit King Beasts. The so-called 5 Spirit King Beasts were the aggregation of the 5 elements spirit beasts that Chu Mu had killed before. They were more powerful than the 5 elements spirit beasts combined. Chu Mu recalled the battle and imagined the combined strength of the 5 elements spirit beasts. He knew that he was not a match for the so-called 5 elements Spirit King Beasts. As for when he would be a match for them, Chu Mu was not sure. What he needed to do was to increase his strength as much as possible. According to the battle at that time, he could only use the corresponding power of rules when fighting with the 5 elements Spirit Beasts. He could only use the power of rules when fighting with the 5 elements Spirit King Beasts. In addition, there was only one chance. In other words, Chu Mu only had one chance to challenge the 5 elements Spirit King Beasts. If he didn't defeat them, he would be killed by them. There was no third result. During the challenge, he couldn't use the 5 spirits' secret order to leave. Therefore, Chu Mu decided to wait until his cultivation had broken through to the 4th sky of Nirvana realm. He would also train the 5 elements sharp metal sword, 5 elements green wood sword, 5 elements flowing water sword, 5 elements raging fire sword and 5 elements thick earth sword to Deshang before challenging the 5 elements Spirit King Beast. This is a good place to cultivate in seclusion. I might as well do my 4th Nirvana here, Chu Mu said to himself. During Nirvana, he was most afraid of being disturbed. He needed a secret place. The deep blue world was not a place he was familiar with. It was not safe to undergo Nirvana in the outside world. Without the 5 spirits' secret order, he couldn't enter the 5 spirits' secret realm. It was the best place to break through. In the following days, Chu Mu stayed in the 2nd level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda. He cultivated the Divine Wilderness Sword technique and the Astral Calamity cultivation technique. Although he couldn't feel the fluctuations of the power of the stars, the heaven and earth Yuan Qi was rich. The power of the 5 elements was rich and could be absorbed for cultivation. Other than cultivating the Divine Wilderness Sword technique and the Astral Calamity cultivation technique, his focus shifted. He no longer focused on comprehending the power of time, but on the cultivation of the 5 elements Spirit King Beast. His strong perception came into play once again, allowing Chu Mu to better grasp the 5 Spirit King Beasts. Chapter 13:24. There were many types of forces. Sects, clans, and gangs were all one type of force, and so were academies. Sects had their own methods of inheritance, clans had their own methods of inheritance, and academies had their own method. The students of academies were different from the disciples of sects and clans. But no matter what, during the period of being a student, they were part of the academies. Even if they left the academies under normal circumstances, most of them would still remember that they were once students of the academies and lend a helping hand when the academies were in trouble. Within the Kanglan Empire, Sky-Bearing Academy wasn't the only academy. In fact, before Sky-Bearing Academy was established, there were already other academies. Among them, the most famous was the Kanglan Empire's signature, Kanglan Academy. Kanglan Academy was established many years ago by an expert of the Kanglan Empire's imperial family. It was a powerful academy of the Kanglan Empire with a long history and deep heritage. A 1,000-year-old clan like the Li clan couldn't be compared to the Kanglan Empire. The Kanglan Academy's recruitment rules were even stricter. One's talent had to reach a certain level before they were qualified to become a student of Kanglan Academy. Not only did Kanglan Academy have a long history and deep heritage, it also had a direct relationship with the Kanglan Empire's imperial family. Some of the students who graduated from Kanglan Academy could even directly enter the Kanglan Empire's imperial family. One had to know that in the entire Kanglan Empire, the imperial family's power was undoubtedly very strong. All the aristocratic clans were below the imperial family, and only one or two powerful sects could be compared. With all sorts of superior conditions, the Azure Water Academia had become the top choice for many cultivators within the empire. Even some geniuses from outside the empire would come here because of its reputation. This led to the students of the Azure Water Academia having extraordinary talents that were far ahead of the other academies. The academy that was ranked second was called Ingtian Academy. Ingtian Academy was established by a saint. This saint was called Ingtian Saint, and was a powerful saint who was proficient in spells. The Ingtian Academy that was established by him had its own unique spells. Originally, Sky-Bearing Academy was established by the Sky Sword Saint, and it also focused on swordsmanship. However, Sky-Bearing Academy overtook them and took third place. Kanglan, Ingtian, Sky-Bearing, and Sky-Bearing were the four great academies of the Kanglan Empire. As for the other academies, they were basically unranked, and it was rare for them to produce any powerful students. Every year, the organizer of the exchange was usually one of the four great academies. As the organizer of this event, Sky-Bearing Academy was working hard to prepare for it. The other academies were also provoking the other academies to select the participants for the exchange. The exchange was a major event and could not be sloppy. It was impossible to bring all the students because there were too many of them. They could only select the best among them. The elites that were selected had to have outstanding abilities. Otherwise, they would not be able to display the prestige of the school. While all the academies were doing their best to prepare, Chu Mu was cultivating on the second level of the Five Spirits Pagoda. The Divine Wilderness Sword Art and the Astral Calamity cultivation technique did not fall behind. As he cultivated, he continued to improve. Although it was slight, he was still close to the peak. After another round of cultivation, Chu Mu stood up and practiced his swordsmanship. This had already become a habit of his. After he finished practicing his swordsmanship, Chu Mu adjusted his breathing. Suddenly, a golden light flashed across his eyes. He muttered, "5 elemental sharp metal sword." In an instant, the power of the 5 elemental rules of order fluctuated rapidly. Following that, the power of the rules of order of gold shone brightly. Using a mysterious method, it poured into the heaven-sword in his hand and slashed forward. In an instant, a ray of dazzling golden light cut through the void. It was so dazzling that nothing could block it. The golden sword light did not dissipate. It slashed the wall of the second level of the Five Spirits Pagoda and shattered it. He could feel that the power of the 5 elemental sharp metal sword was very strong. Its specialty was its sharpness. The power of the rules of Order of Gold was condensed into one and released by the sword. It was sharper than the tip of a sword and could cut through everything. However, the 5 Spirits Pagoda was very sturdy. With his current strength, he could not even shake it, let alone destroy it. Hence, Chu Mu was not very clear about the power of the 5 elemental sharp metal sword. However, he was sure that his cultivation of the 5 elemental sharp metal sword was only at the small success stage. He was still far from Deshang. He slashed out again. The golden sword light crossed the sky and slashed the wall of the second level of the 5 Spirits Pagoda. With a pop, it dissipated again. Chu Mu cultivated like that. After every slash, he would stop and think. He would repeatedly comprehend where he was lacking, where he could improve, and where he could do better. Every time he slashed out, he would do his best. The power of his spiritual sense, sword origin, rules of Order of Gold, etc. It was not easy to cultivate a unique skill. It required the cooperation of various powers. In terms of controlling power, Chu Mu was unique. Ordinary people could not compare with him. After using up all of his sword origin, Chu Mu also used up most of his spiritual sense. He stopped cultivating the 5 elemental sharp metal sword and sat down cross-legged to recover his power. When his sword origin was fully recovered, so was his spiritual sense. Chu Mu continued to cultivate. In his eyes, a wisp of green flashed. That wisp of green was full of vitality. It was like a seedling growing. Immediately, the rules of Order of Wood shone brightly and poured into the sword. He then slashed out. The green sword light slashed out towards the wall of the 5 Spirits Pagoda. When the green sword light hit the wall, it did not break instantly like the golden sword light. Instead, the front part broke and the back part followed. The broken part seemed to be absorbing the rules of Order of Wood in the air to replenish itself. The specialty of the 5 elemental sharp metal sword was its sharpness. It could cut through everything. On the other hand, the 5 elemental green wood sword was endlessly growing. Just like cultivating the 5 elemental sharp metal sword, Chu Mu swung the sword again and again until his power was exhausted. He then sat down cross-legged and continued to recover. After he had fully recovered, he began to cultivate the 5 elemental flowing water sword. The rules of Order of 5 Elements operated. The rules of Order of Water shone brightly and fluctuated violently. It poured into the Heaven/Sword. The deep blue light filled the Heaven/Sword with a mysterious aura. As he slashed out, the blue sword light raged. Between the fluctuations, there seemed to be the sound of flowing water. It gave people a feeling that it was endless. When it slashed the wall of the pagoda, the blue light shattered like water ripples and turned into sputtering bits. The following sword light followed and flowed out continuously. It seemed gentle, but it was actually very tough. The 5 elemental flowing water sword was different from the 5 elemental green wood sword. He cultivated tirelessly. When his power was exhausted, he would recover and continue to cultivate. This time, it was to cultivate the Raging Inferno sword. The rules of Order of Fire shone brightly and poured into the Heaven/Sword. It was as if a raging fire was burning, and the scorching aura fluctuated. As he slashed out, the fiery red sword light was filled with a violent and scorching aura. It blasted out like a ball of fire. After it hit the wall of the pagoda with a bang, the fiery red sword light shattered. However, the power that erupted in an instant was incomparably tyrannical. The 5 elemental blazing sword was characterized by its high temperature and instantaneous explosive power. It was as if all the power was blended into a ball and released in an instant, causing great destruction. The last one to cultivate was the 5 elemental thick earth sword. The rules of Order of Earth grew stronger and poured into the Heaven/Sword. Suddenly, a brown light gathered on the Heaven/Sword. There was no bright light. There was only a deep and restrained color, as if it had solidified. Chu Mu only felt the sword in his hand sink. Its weight seemed to have increased by thousands of times. As he slashed out, a heavy aura filled the air. The brown sword light was like a mountain, a thick earth, crushing everything. The terrifying power was stable and solidified, suppressing everything. Each of the 5 ordinary lost arts had its own uniqueness. None of them were weak. It was worth Chu Mu's time to cultivate. As the days passed, Chu Mu continued to cultivate the 5 lost arts. Every time his power was exhausted and recovered, there would be a slight improvement. Finally, Chu Mu's chi cultivation and physique cultivation broke through as he wished. He was now at the peak of the 3rd sky of Nirvana realm. I've finally reached the peak. Next, I'll consolidate it for a few days. Then, I'll go for the 4th Nirvana realm. Chu Mu thought to himself. He continued to cultivate. After a few days, his cultivation was completely consolidated. Chu Mu was also ready to go for the 4th Nirvana realm. Previously, he did not have much Nirvana chi left from the Nirvana realm. However, the spatial rings of the 8 heavenly guards of the Li family, the 3rd commander of the Li family, and Wei Yang, who was the earliest, all had Nirvana chi. Although each of them did not have much Nirvana chi, together with what Chu Mu had left, it was just enough for him to go for the 4th Nirvana realm. There were 9 levels in the Nirvana realm. The 1st to 3rd levels were the lower levels, the 4th to 6th levels were the middle levels, and the 7th to 9th levels were the upper levels. The difference between the lower, middle, and upper levels was very obvious. It was much bigger than the difference between the 1st and 2nd levels. This was because in the lower levels of the Nirvana realm, the main Nirvana realm was the body. Through repeated Nirvana realms, a near-perfect body would be formed, which was more beneficial for cultivation. In the middle levels of the Nirvana realm, it was the Dantian. Through the reorganization of the Nirvana realm, a powerful and perfect Dantian would be formed. It was also a great help for future cultivation. As for the upper levels of the Nirvana realm was the soul. The Nirvana realm of the soul was the most dangerous. If one was not careful, one's soul would collapse and disappear between heaven and earth. Therefore, many Nirvana realm swordsmen would only cultivate to the 7th level of the Nirvana realm. They did not have the confidence to continue the Nirvana realm. They generally understood that with their talent, they would not be able to endure the 8th level of the Nirvana realm, let alone the 9th level. Many martial saints were actually cultivators at the 7th level of the Nirvana realm. Because the soul at the 6th level of the Nirvana realm had not transformed, they could not break through to the eternal realm. Chu Mu began the 4th Nirvana realm. Chapter 13:25. On the 2nd level of the 5 spirits' secret pagoda, Chu Mu had undergone nirvana. His flesh and blood were broken and nirvana chi flowed through it, refining the broken flesh and blood and causing it to recombine. However, after 3 nirvanas and all of them were perfect, Chu Mu's flesh and blood had been refined to the most perfect state. Even if nirvana chi flowed through it and wanted to refine it again, there would be no effect. This time, the focus of nirvana chi was on the Dantian. The Dantian was a space in the body. It was a hidden space that did not exist physically, but it still existed. Chu Mu's Dantian was very strong. Because it had undergone a mutation, it was many times more stable and bigger than an ordinary cultivator's Dantian. A strong Dantian had its advantages and disadvantages. During nirvana, it would be more difficult and more nirvana chi would be consumed. Fortunately, Chu Mu was well prepared. He knew that his Dantian was different from an ordinary cultivator's and needed more nirvana chi. His Dantian was broken and it was extremely painful. Chu Mu could feel it clearly, but he endured it. Under the impact of nirvana chi, the broken Dantian kept giving out a numb and itchy feeling. Chu Mu wanted to reach out and grab it, but his body was broken and he had no hands or legs. Only his soul was left and he could still feel it. In the 5 spirits' secret realm, the chi of heaven and earth kept gathering from afar and finally gathered above the five spirits' secret pagoda. The chi of heaven and earth outside was also attracted and rushed into the five spirits' secret realm. Clouds of chi of heaven and earth appeared one by one. There were a total of 4 clouds, and each cloud had a radius of 9 miles. Immediately after, the power of the stars in the sky was attracted and streaks of starlight gathered like a tide. It was a huge vision. This place was remote and usually no one would come here. However, Chu Mu's breakthrough was not small and it attracted the attention of some experts. These experts raised their heads and looked over. Their deep and sharp eyes seemed to be able to pierce through time and space. Could it be that a rare treasure has appeared? These experts were all guessing. When a rare treasure appeared, it was usually accompanied by a phenomenon. As for the phenomenon of a breakthrough in cultivation, it was very rare. Since they thought about the appearance of a rare treasure, it was impossible for these experts not to be moved. Immediately, one by one, they leaped into the air and flew towards the place where the starlight gathered. That place was very remote, so they couldn't get there in a short time. However, there were still 3 to 4 days before and after each nirvana, which was more than enough time for these experts to arrive. When these experts arrived one after another, they discovered that the starlight tide and the chi of heaven and earth had converged at a certain point before disappearing. They carefully searched the places where the starlight tide and the heaven and earth yuan chi had disappeared, but they found nothing. They didn't know where the starlight tide and the heaven and earth yuan chi had gone, and they didn't sense any aura fluctuations from any treasures. As they continued to search, some experts felt that it was very likely to be a different space or a secret realm. He couldn't help but feel even more excited. The value of an alien space or a secret realm was even greater. Furthermore, the starlight and the heaven and earth yuan chi gathered together. Obviously, there was a unique treasure in that alien space or secret realm. However, no matter how hard they searched, they still couldn't find the existence of the five spirits' secret pagoda. Firstly, the five spirits' secret realm already had an owner, and that was Chu Mu. Secondly, only Nirvana realm experts could enter the five spirits' secret realm, and these experts were all in the eternal realm. After searching for a day or two without finding any clues, some experts simply gave up and left. Alien spaces and secret realms were also dependent on fate. Without fate, it was useless to force it. However, although some experts understood this point, they were still unwilling to give up and continued to search, using all kinds of methods. Finally, the starlight tide and the heaven and earth yuan chi had all disappeared without a trace. Another 5 days passed, but they didn't find anything. Only then did these experts leave unwillingly. After about half a day, a figure appeared out of thin air. It was Chu Mu. From before to after the breakthrough, Chu Mu used a total of 4 days. After the breakthrough, his dantian completed its first nirvana, which was also a perfect nirvana. His chi cultivation and body cultivation had both broken through to the early fourth sky of nirvana realm. Chu Mu used a few days to consolidate his cultivation. Fortunately, he used a few days to consolidate his cultivation. Otherwise, if he came out right after the breakthrough, he would have been discovered by the Eternal Realm experts who hadn't left yet. He would have been caught and his life would have been in danger. He took out the flying ship, entered it, and started it, heading towards Sky-Bearing Academy. As he flew, he studied his dantian after the nirvana. Sky-Bearing Academy was very lively. This was because the Kanglan dynasty's triennial exchange had already begun, and it had also ended. Kanglan Academy, Ingtian Academy, Sky-Bearing Academy, and Skyrays Academy were the 4 major academies. In addition, there were a dozen smaller academies participating. Those smaller academies were participating in the exchange of academies, but in reality, they were just bringing their students to broaden their horizons. After all, the students who were selected to participate in the exchange of academies were the most elite of their respective academies. Their talents were relatively good in all aspects, and they were worth nurturing. Their future paths were also relatively broad. This was also the tragedy of the small academies. Basically, the true geniuses were all recruited by the 4 major academies. This was very normal. People always wanted to climb higher. The cultivation environment, teachers, and cultivation resources of the 4 major academies were many times better than those of the small academies. It was indeed possible for some small academies to have dark horses appear, but it was very rare. Sometimes it would take many years for one to appear. Obviously, this time, there were no powerful dark horses among the dozen or so small academies. However, to be able to spar with the geniuses of the 4 major academies was a great experience for them. In the Academia Exchange, the exchange of spells and sword techniques was divided into the Xian Palace, the Earth Palace, and the Celestial Palace. The top 10 in the Xian Palace would receive decent rewards, and the top 3 would receive generous rewards. The first place would be the most generous. Similarly, the top 10 and top 3 in the Earth Palace, as well as the top 10 and top 3 in the Celestial Palace, would all receive rewards. These rewards were enough to make the students go wild with joy. It would be of great help to their cultivation. It was worth mentioning that Chun Li had actually obtained first place in the Earth Palace Sword Technique Exchange. This made the people of Sky Bearing Academy very happy because this was the only first place in Sky Bearing Academy. In terms of spells, Sky Bearing Academy was suppressed by Kanglin Academy and Intian Academy. They didn't even have a single top 3. There were a few in the top 10, but they couldn't be compared to Kanglin Academy and Intian Academy. However, in terms of sword techniques, they had some merit. Among them, the Mysterious Palace Sword Technique Department had 3 in the top 10, while the Earth Palace Sword Technique Department had 14. Chun-Li had also obtained first place, while the Sky Palace Sword Technique Department had 13. The exchange of academies ended here. Next, it was time to give out the rewards. These rewards were given by the Kanglin Empire. One had to know that this was the territory of the Kanglin Empire. They were all citizens of the Kanglin Empire. If they grew stronger, it would be a good thing for the Kanglin Empire. These rewards were generous to them, but to the Empire, it was just a drop in the ocean. And they would also know that these rewards were given by the Empire. Leaving an impression was ultimately a good thing. After the rewards were given out, most people were very happy. Usually, the exchange of academies that would last for a few days should have ended by now. Hold on, I have a suggestion. Suddenly, the Skyrays Academy's Sword Arts Vice-Head said in a clear voice, attracting everyone's attention. Seeing that everyone was attracted by his voice, he felt proud and continued, in the past, every time the Academy Exchange was held, it would end like this. I feel that this isn't exciting enough. Then why don't you say what you have in mind? The Skyrays Academy Sword Technique Vice-Sect Master asked. Actually, I've been thinking about this suggestion for a long time before the exchange started. I hope that everyone will support me. The Skyrays Academy Sword Technique Vice-Sect Master smiled and said, I feel that since it's an exchange of academies, it should be a matter of the entire academy. However, due to some restrictions, it's impossible for all academies to participate. We can only select a small portion of the elite. As he spoke, he paused to give everyone some time to react before continuing. Since this is the Academy's exchange, I feel that other than the students, there should also be exchanges between the instructors. After all, the students are a part of the Academy, and the instructors are also a part of the Academy. The Sword Arts Vice-Head seat of the Skyrays Academy finally voiced his suggestion. I feel that this suggestion makes sense. The Skyrays Academy Sword Technique Vice-Sect Master also acted as if he had thought about it and agreed. In fact, he had already known about this suggestion. It does sound reasonable. Yes, it does make sense. Since it's an exchange of academies, it shouldn't be limited to the students. Instructors can also have exchanges. Exchanges between instructors can also help to improve the instructor's abilities. Obviously, this was a good suggestion that was approved by the vice-sect masters of the 4 great academies and the other small academies. The 2 vice-sect masters of the Skyrays Academy both revealed smiles. Since that's the case, why don't we discuss it now and set a time to gather the instructors for the second phase of the exchange, one of the vice-sect masters said. I don't think that's necessary. This time, the instructors who came with the students are considered the more outstanding part of their respective academies. Why don't we have these instructors exchange first? If it's feasible, we can arrange the exchanges between instructors to be held in the future exchange of academies, the Skyrays Academy Sword Technique Vice-Sect Master said. Since that's the case, why don't we try it out while everyone is here and see if it's feasible? If it's feasible, we can add the exchanges between instructors to the exchange of academies and make it a part of the exchange of academies. In the end, with the vice-sect masters' agreement, they decided to do this. Chapter 13:26. While Chu-Mu was on his way back, there were some changes to the Sky-Bearing Academy's exchange due to the suggestion of the Sky-Raising Academy's Sword Arts Vice-Chairperson. As the host, Sky-Bearing Academy's Spell Arts Vice-Chairperson, Lin Yuan, personally announced the news. The students were not aware of this change and were unable to react to it. After 3 breaths, they started to discuss among themselves. Even the instructors are going to have an exchange? That's great. I still felt that the exchange would not be exciting enough if it ended just like this. The exchange between the instructors will definitely be more exciting. Let's start, I can't wait. The students were all excited. Even the students who were ranked had looks of anticipation on their faces. Although some of the spells and sword arts that they studied were comparable to the instructors, or even slightly better, the instructors were still instructors. They were older and had cultivated for a longer period of time. Naturally, they would have more experience. When the various vice-chairmen saw the reactions of the students, they smiled and felt that this idea was feasible. Since that was the case, they would proceed with the exchange between the instructors. The exchange between the instructors was also divided into 2 parts: spells and sword arts. This was the territory of the Sky-Bearing Academy. Most of the instructors of the Sky-Bearing Academy were present. There were not many instructors from the other academies, only a portion of them. Hence, it was impossible for all of the Sky-Bearing Academy's instructors to take action. Because it was only a preliminary project, it was decided that each school would send 6 instructors to conduct the exchange. 3 of them would be instructors of spells, and 3 of them would be instructors of swordsmanship. This was only a preliminary experiment, and it was not as strict as the exchange between students, which was divided into Xian Palace, Earth Palace, and Celestial Palace. Although it was just a preliminary exchange between instructors, each academy placed great importance on it. They wanted to show off their academy's prowess. The 6 instructors sent by the Sky-Bearing Academy were all top instructors in spells and sword art. They were all instructors from the Sky Palace. The instructors from the other academies were mostly from the Sky Palace. It was just nice. Speaking of which, the 4 major academies were the main focus. The other 10 or so smaller academies would eventually be relegated to the background. The exchange between the instructors began. Because there were not many participants, they were not separated. The first part was the exchange between the spell arts instructors. The Sky-Bearing Academy was founded on sword art. Therefore, even though they had developed their techniques over a period of time, there was still an obvious gap between them and the Ingtian Academy of the Kanglan Academy. However, they were not inferior to the Skyrays Academy. The Sky-Bearing Academy did not hold much hope for the exchange of spells, as they knew their limits. However, they were looking forward to the exchange of sword skills. After all, the founder of the Sky-Bearing Academy, the Sky-Bearing Sword Saint, was proficient in sword skills and founded the academy with sword skills. For the spell exchange, each academy would send 3 spell instructors, so there would be exactly 20 spell instructors from all the academies. That was a total of 60 spell instructors. The exchange of spells wasn't about who was more powerful, who knew more spells, whose grade was higher, or whose spells were more powerful. Instead, it was about one's control and application of spells. Every instructor who participated in the exchange was in the Nirvana realm. During the exchange, they would completely restrict their cultivation and only use their seals and the power of rules they had grasped to execute the spell art. Some of the more powerful spells had a clear requirement for one's cultivation. If one's cultivation was not high enough, they would not be able to execute the spell. On the other hand, the weaker spells could be executed easily, but their destructive power was not strong enough. In order to defeat the opponent, one had to have a strong grasp of the spell art. Simple basic hand seals, incomparably nimble fingers sketched in the void, as if they were perfectly carved works of art. The spell techniques were beautiful and full of power, and they were colorful and varied in form. The spell arts instructors engaged in an exciting one-on-one battle of spells. All the students were focused on watching. Almost all the students cultivated both spells and sword art. Therefore, it was helpful for them to watch the battle of spells and sword art. The one-on-one battle of the Academy's spell arts instructors was very exciting. Especially at the end, the battle between the top spell arts instructors of the 4 academies was even more exciting. The top spell arts instructors of the academies appeared, followed by the head instructor. The spell arts battle between the head instructors was several times more exciting than the spell arts battle between the top spell arts instructors. It was even more exciting than the spell arts battle between the top spell arts instructors. Spells were executed easily by the head instructors of each academy. Spells that did not seem to be very powerful were executed easily by the spell arts instructors of each academy. Their movements were graceful and coherent. It was as if they were turning something rotten into something magical. Different combinations of spells with little power could explode with shocking power. It was an eye-opener for everyone. The vice-chairmen of the academies nodded their heads. The spell arts instructors of the academies were not much different from them in terms of spell arts control. After a while, the spell arts battle between the academy's instructors ended. In the end, the spell arts instructors of the Kanglan Academy came out on top. The Intian Academy was second, the Sky-Bearing Academy was third, and the Skyrays Academy was fourth. This was a very normal ranking. No one was surprised. However, this was just a suggestion. It was an exchange between the instructors. They were only trying to see if it was feasible. Therefore, there was no reward. Only after trying it out and finding it feasible would they report it to the Kanglan Empire. After the spell arts battle between the instructors ended, it was the sword arts battle between the instructors. In theory, the Sky-Bearing Academy and the Skyrays Academy were founded on the sword. In terms of sword arts, they had their own unique point. However, in reality, the Kanglan Academy, which was the most ancient and had the deepest foundation, was the strongest among all the academies in terms of spell arts and sword art. As for the Ingtian Academy, they were most proficient in spell art. In terms of sword arts, they were much weaker. The sword arts instructors of the various academies all suppressed their own cultivation and only used the sword arts they had mastered to fight. Putting aside the factor of cultivation, only a duel of swordsmanship would be able to reflect everyone's level of swordsmanship. Otherwise, the instructors would have different cultivation levels and different cultivation method. If they used their cultivation levels, the duel of swordsmanship would not be as realistic. The 3 sword arts instructors from the Sky-Bearing Academy were all sword arts instructors from the Sky Palace. The strongest one was the number 1 sword arts instructor, Fong Shanhai. As for the other 3 academies, other than the number 1 sword arts instructor, there was also a head instructor. Simply put, among the 4 great academies, only Sky-Bearing Academy did not have a swordsmanship in chief. As for the other small academies, needless to say, they were only there to participate. The outcome had nothing to do with them. The battle began. After one battle after another, Fang Shanhai's opponent was a sword arts instructor from the Skyrays Academy. Lu Ling, use your sword. Let me see what the Skyrays Academy's head instructor is capable of. Fang Shanhai pointed his sword at the Skyrays Academy's sword arts instructor, Lu Ling, and said in a threatening tone. Fang Shanhai had applied many times to become the head instructor of swordsmanship in the Sky-Bearing Academy. However, Mu Shihua felt that Fang Shanhai's attainment in swordsmanship was still lacking and had not been approved. Previously, Mu Shihua had nominated a newcomer to be the head instructor of swordsmanship in the academy, which made Fang Shanhai feel a great sense of danger. He had originally planned to make a move on Chu Mu. However, he had been busy with the Sky-Bearing Academy exchange and had temporarily put it aside. Now, the sudden exchange between instructors gave him an opportunity. He felt that as long as he could defeat the head instructor of the Skyrays Academy and prove his attainment in sword arts, he would be able to become the head instructor of the Sky-Bearing Academy. The difference in status between the number 1 sword arts instructor of the Sky Palace and the head instructor of the Sky-Bearing Academy was very obvious. Your information is outdated. I am no longer the head instructor of the Sky-Bearing Academy. Lu Ling smiled coldly and said, however, even so, you are still not my match. You will only know after you try. Fang Shanhai snorted coldly and drew his sword. Sword light broke through the air like lightning and arrived in an instant. Lu Ling also drew his sword without hesitation and counterattacked. Both of their attainments in sword arts were actually about the same. In the end, Lu Ling was slightly stronger and defeated Fang Shanhai. That sword was very exquisite. The sword arts vice-chairs were all stunned. However, the sword arts vice-chair of the Sky-Bearing Academy smiled and glanced at one of the sword arts instructors who had participated in the exchange. This person had an arrogant expression and a disdainful look in his eyes, as if he was looking at an ant. When it was this person's turn to attack, he defeated his opponent with a casual sword strike. It did not matter if the opponent was a sword arts instructor of the Sky Palace, the number 1 sword arts instructor of the Sky Palace, or the head instructor of the Sky-Bearing Academy. What a strong attainment in sword arts! Too terrifying! Who is he? He is our Sky-Bearing Academy's new head instructor of sword arts. Even the sword arts vice-chair thinks that his sword arts cannot be compared to his. The student of the Sky-Bearing Academy said proudly. He did not conceal his words and did not intentionally suppress them. Everyone heard it and were shocked. Their gazes all landed on that person's face. Your sword arts are too weak. That person suddenly spoke and pointed his sword at the vice-chairs of the various academies. In the end, he locked his gaze on Mu Shihua, the sword arts vice-chair of the Sky-Bearing Academy. I heard that the founder of the Sky-Bearing Academy, the Sky-Bearing Sword Saint, had some unique points in sword arts. I wonder how much of it has been passed down in the Sky-Bearing Academy? Can you give me some pointers? Although he did not mention a name, the sword tip was pointed at Mu Shihua. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Mu Shihua could not back down. Your sword arts are superb. I admit that I am not as good as you. It is a pity that our Sky-Bearing Academy has a superb sword arts instructor who went into seclusion to achieve a breakthrough in his cultivation and missed this exchange. Mu Shihua's thoughts changed and he admitted that he was not as good as the other party. He then changed the topic to divert everyone's attention. Is that so? The Sky-Bearing Academy's new head instructor smiled coldly. His eyes were filled with arrogance and disdain. To practice the sword, one must comprehend the essence of the sword arts and grasp sword force. I think that none of you have grasped sword force. Without sword force, what is the point of practicing the sword? His arrogant words caused everyone's expression to change drastically. Chapter 13:27. The Skyrays Academy's chief sword instructor's extremely arrogant attitude and disdainful tone caused the expressions of all the sword instructors and vice sect lords to change drastically. He was obviously mocking them, saying that they weren't worthy of practicing the sword and that they weren't qualified to practice the sword. While they were furious, they were also attracted by this person's words. They were attracted by one of the words, sword force. "You're saying sword force?" one of the vice sect lords said in astonishment. "Could it be that you've already grasped sword force?" Another vice sect lord's voice trembled. "Is it very difficult to grasp sword force?" The arrogant chief sword instructor of Skyrays Academy smiled and said. Immediately after, his wrist trembled slightly, and the sword he was pointing at instantly trembled. A wisp of silver light flowed on the sword, and as the light flickered, it moved toward the tip of the sword like water ripples. A terrifying and indescribable sharpness spread out, as if a heavenly sword had descended. It caused everyone present to tremble, and their expressions changed drastically. It was as if their bodies were being sliced apart by a terrifying sharpness, and even their souls were being sliced apart. Sword. Sword. Sword force. It's really sword force. Unbelievable. All of the vice-chairmen of the academia were trembling. It's rumored that there are some monstrous swordplay geniuses with unparalleled talent who are able to comprehend the essence of swordplay and grasp sword force before becoming a sword saint. However, from ancient times until now, such monstrous swordplay geniuses are too few. I've lived for 200 years, but I've never seen one before. I didn't expect this. In the knowledge of many sword instructors and vice sect lords, only experts who were proficient in sword Dao and had reached the saint realm would be able to grasp sword force. To put it simply, to a certain extent, sword force was the symbol of a sword saint. But now they had seen something. A cultivator who was merely at the sixth sky of Nirvana realm had actually grasped sword force. To them, this was simply unbelievable. It was as if they had heard of a legend. Mu Shihua's expression changed drastically as well. He knew that Chu Mu's sword art was superb, but he wasn't sure if Chu Mu had also comprehended the essence of swordplay and grasped sword force. Moreover, he heard that sword force was also divided into different levels. Though the vice head of Skyrays Academy was astonished, there was a smile in the depths of his eyes. It was because he was the one who had suggested the exchange of instructors. His goal was very clear, and that was to let Skyrays Academy be in the limelight. Evidently, he had succeeded. The news of a sword arts teacher-in-chief who grasped sword force would spread out very quickly. At that time, the Skyrays Academy's reputation would soar and might even overshadow the Azure Billow Academy. They would be in the limelight for a period of time and be the focus of attention. At that time, there would naturally be geniuses and super geniuses who would come to join the Skyrays Academy, especially those geniuses who were proficient in sword arts. At that time, the Skyrays Academy would definitely rise up and surpass the Sky-Bearing Academy and even the Azure Billow Academy. The beautiful blueprint unfolded before his eyes. Even the Skyrays Learning Academy's vice sect lord wanted to laugh loudly in delight. The only thing that annoyed him was that the new teacher-in-chief of swordsmanship was too arrogant. Although the teacher-in-chief's status was not as high as the vice-chairman's, the other party's superb swordsmanship and tyrannical strength meant that even he was no match for him. He had to back down a little. Because of the appearance of this person, the exchange between the Academy's teachers fell into a stalemate. The stalemate had to be broken. Otherwise, this exchange would be equivalent to having a stain on it. Other than the Skyrays Academy, the other academies might become laughingstock. However, from the looks of it, everyone was stunned and didn't have the ability to break the stalemate. The atmosphere fell into a strange silence. What a pity! It seems that no one in the various academies can fight against me in sword arts, the Skyrays Academy's vice sect lord said. Although he said that it was a pity, his tone was still boundlessly arrogant. In that case, how about I be your opponent? Just as everyone was feeling embarrassed and silent, a voice suddenly rang out. It was as if it came from beyond the heavens. It was so tranquil and distant, and when it entered everyone's ears, it instantly had the effect of calming down the embarrassment in their hearts. Who is it? The Sky Rays Academy's Vice-Sect Lord looked in the direction of the voice. His eyes emitted a shocking cold light as he shouted. His sword intent surged, and the sharpness was unrestrained. It was as if an invisible aura was soaring into the sky. It's me. The voice rang out, and a figure of light flew over rapidly. It was a flying ship. Immediately after, the flying ship stopped in the sky above the Sky Rays Academy. The door opened, and a figure flew out and landed. Instructor Chu. The students of the 3 sword departments of the Earth Palace exclaimed in surprise. Instructor Chu, you're back. Mu Shihua was also shocked before he was overjoyed. So he's Chu Mu, an early-stage 4th sky of Nirvana realm. Humph! Fang Shanhai snorted coldly. His expression was filled with disdain. The people of the other academies didn't understand. They were puzzled and curious. So it's you. The Sky Rays Academy's Vice-Sect Lord stared at Chu Mu. His voice was ice-cold, and his eyes were extremely cold. He shook his sword and pointed it at Chu Mu. A silver luster flickered on the sword, and the sword energy surged with a shocking sharpness. I didn't expect it to be you either, Chu Mu said indifferently. The heaven-sword appeared in his hand. The sword trembled slightly, and suddenly, a wisp of silver light appeared out of nowhere. It flowed on the sword, and a frightening sharpness aura rippled out wantonly. Sword energy! This lad has actually grasped sword energy. Unbelievable! There's actually a second person who has grasped sword energy, and he looks so young. Exclamations of surprise were incessant. Even Mu Shihua, who understood Chu Mu the most, had his eyes wide open. His eyeballs were about to pop out. The students of the 3 sword departments of the Earth Palace were shocked at first, but they were soon overjoyed. They were incomparably excited because Chu Mu was their Vice-Sect Lord. While Vice-Sect Lord Lin Yuan was shocked, he also felt a sense of regret. If he had known that Chu Mu had grasped sword energy, he definitely wouldn't have disagreed with Mu Shihua's suggestion and directly appointed Chu Mu as the Academy's Vice-Sect Lord. It's not too late, Lin Yuan said inwardly. The Earth Palace's Vice-Sect Lord, Wang Yefeng, had a very ugly expression. Fang Shanhai's expression was also very ugly. Chu Mu's attainments in sword arts had completely exceeded their expectations. He had even grasped sword energy. The 2 swords faced each other from a distance. The astonishing sword energy and sharpness fluctuations made people's hearts palpitate. Chu Mu's opponent couldn't be considered an acquaintance, but it was someone he knew. Furthermore, it was someone he had some conflicts with before. It was Renli, who had been brought by Qin Zhenyu to find trouble with him on the Hidden Edge starship. He was at the 6th firmament of Nirvana realm. If it was said that Chu Mu was still wary of him before, then there was nothing to be afraid of now. This was because Chu Mu's cultivation had broken through to the 4th firmament of Nirvana realm. He believed that his sword domain was enough to affect his opponent. Moreover, the current situation was a competition of sword arts. I will let you know that there is always someone better than you, Renli sneered. Immediately after, he slid a step forward. The sword light was like a silver thunderbolt that streaked across the sky. It was cold, desolate, and violent. In an instant it was in front of Chu Mu. Although this sword strike didn't use sword energy or the power of sword intent law, it contained sword energy. Moreover, it was the essence of the sword arts that Renli had grasped. It was very exquisite, sharp, and extremely fast. This sword strike caused a lot of exclamations. Chu Mu's expression didn't change. The heaven-sword trembled and pierced out at an extremely high speed. It was aimed at Renli's face and directly between his eyebrows. Renli's expression changed drastically. He felt a sharp pain between his eyebrows as if he was about to be pierced. Renli hurriedly changed his sword arts and moved his feet. He was about to dodge Chu Mu's sword strike that was like a stream of light. Chu Mu's wrist shook and the sword light turned into a fan shape. It covered the front and swept past Renli's neck. It was a merciless attack. Renli's attainment in sword arts was indeed very strong. He was much stronger than Mu Shihua. He had comprehended the essence of sword art. Moreover, his sword energy had reached the 6th level. It was very powerful. However, his opponent was Chu Mu, a peerless genius who was more talented than him. Apart from cultivation, Chu Mu was much stronger than him in all other aspects. The sword art was displayed and the essence was displayed. Every strike was like a violent thunderbolt that swept across the sky and swept across the world. Suddenly, it was like a volcano erupting and destroying the world. Suddenly, it was like a storm passing through and destroying everything. Soon after, it was like a monstrous flood that destroyed everything. Every change was different. However, every change was extremely violent and shocking. The crowd only saw that Chu Mu's sword light was sometimes like a thunderbolt, sometimes like a raging fire, sometimes like a storm, sometimes like a flood, and sometimes like a mountain. Every strike was different, but it was the essence of sword arts. The crowd was extremely shocked and intoxicated. They were unable to extricate themselves from it. Renli was shocked and angry. He used his sword arts with all his might, but he was completely suppressed by Chu Mu. He could only passively defend and dodge. This kind of sullen feeling almost made him collapse. Suddenly, Chu Mu's sword technique changed. It went from a thunderous and raging fire berserk to one that grew and multiplied endlessly like a tree. With one slash, the silver sword light that contained sword energy was inextinguishable. It unceasingly attacked, causing Renli to be unable to dodge. Blocking was extremely difficult. With great difficulty, Renli resisted the endless attacks of the silver sword light. Before he could counterattack, the silver sword light suddenly flowed like water. Although it was not strong, it was continuous and very flexible. It bound Renli's sword and made him unable to counterattack. It turned out that after Chu Mu attacked for a while, he had a flash of inspiration and thought of the 5 ordinary unique skills of the 5 elements. He extracted the essence of the 5 elements and integrated it into the sword art. As expected, it made the style of the sword art more varied. Moreover, when the changes were connected, its power increased greatly. Unknowingly, Renli had become Chu Mu's practice target. He was like a live target. The unparalleled sword and the unparalleled sword art shocked countless people to the point of numbness. It also made Renli clench his teeth so hard that they almost broke. Sword light of different colors, sword light of different styles, made Renli unable to deal with it. When he was about to be defeated, Renli suddenly burst out. The powerful power of the 6th sky of Nirvana realm poured out in an instant. It poured into the sword in his hand like a flood bursting through a dam. The sword light shone brightly and a violent aura overflowed. The sword slashed towards Chu Mu at an even faster speed. Chapter 1328. The resplendent sword light was like a meteorite from the 9th heaven. The sudden eruption shocked everyone. As the sword slashed down, an incomparably tyrannical power erupted. With a boom, Chu Mu was sent flying. His blood and chi shook and his bones went numb. Since he had erupted with his cultivation and all his strength, Renli showed no mercy. He planned to kill Chu Mu right here and now. With another sword slash, the sword light exploded. The terrifying roar made everyone feel as if their eardrums were being torn apart. Everyone revealed a pained expression and hurriedly retreated. Even the vice-sect lords were the same, because their cultivation was at the Nirvana realm. When Renli erupted with his full strength, Chu Mu sensed it. He hurriedly released his cultivation to block Renli's sudden sword attack. But because it was a little rushed, his blood and chi were shaken. Renly displayed a heaven-grade sword art, but Chu Mu completely adjusted and slashed out with his sword. A tyrannical ancient sword chi shot out, tearing through the sky. The terrifying divine wilderness sword essence made the ancient sword art even more powerful than before. Low-level Nirvana realm focused on the body. Middle-level Nirvana realm focused on the Dantian. Fourth-level Nirvana realm, after the Dantian went through Nirvana, it became more stable and possessed a mysterious power. Under that mysterious power, the divine wilderness sword essence became more condensed and its power increased by 30%. Moreover, the recovery speed of the sword essence had greatly increased. Fourth sky of Nirvana realm against sixth sky of Nirvana realm. Logically speaking, Chu Mu should not be Renli's opponent with the difference of 2 realms. However, that was not the case. Chu Mu did not fall into a disadvantageous position when fighting against Renli, because Chu Mu also had the cultivation of body cultivation, which was equally powerful. Renli's face changed. He never thought that the person he looked down on would be so powerful that he could fight against him. His body trembled. A fiery red force field instantly spread out and enveloped Chu Mu. Immediately, the sword in his hand seemed to turn into a ball of raging flames. It was like a meteorite from outer space, carrying an unparalleled power that bombarded and destroyed everything. Golden light radiated from Chu Mu's body. The law of metal fluctuated and its sharpness was astonishing. The heaven-sword was dyed golden. The metal force field and the fire force field collided. The power of the collision was overwhelming. The sword light slashed through the sky. It was incomparably dazzling, blinding everyone's eyes. They couldn't look at it directly. The shocking sharpness was earth-shattering. 5 elements sharp metal sword. The terrifying golden sword light slashed out, directly splitting Renli's fire force field. The shocking sharpness made Renli's whole body shiver, and his face changed drastically. The meteor-like raging fire was also cut apart by the golden sword light. After defeating the 5 elemental sharp metal swords with 3 slashes, Chu Mu pointed his sword forward. A wisp of silver sword aura shot forward with an aura that could break through the void. It shot into Renli's fire force field and attacked Renli. It was the ultimate technique, Void Pierce Sword Aura. Renli was also a super genius and had grasped many techniques. He immediately reacted. The sword light attacked like a storm, attacking from all angles and shattering the void-piercing sword chi. Renli seemed to know that he couldn't do anything to Chu Mu. After shattering the void-piercing sword chi, he executed a sharp sword art. The sword light was like a raging inferno. He then soared into the sky and became one with his sword. He turned into a wisp of sword light and flew away rapidly. The speed was extremely fast and very sudden. It was completely out of everyone's expectations. The heaven-sword was raised. Silver light flickered and the void-piercing sword chi shot out. It was extremely fast and shot towards Renli, who had already flown a few thousand meters away. Everyone heard a groan. Renli was obviously hit and injured. However, he burst forth with an even faster speed and executed some kind of secret technique, disappearing before everyone's eyes. Chu Mu didn't give chase. It was also difficult for him to do so. Renli was a super genius and his cultivation was 2 heavens above Chu Mu's. Furthermore, he didn't care about the cost of executing a secret technique to increase his speed. The truth was that the Sky Raising Academy didn't achieve its goal of becoming famous. Instead, it created the Sky Bearing Academy. Chu Mu, the Earth Palace sword art instructor of the Sky Bearing Academy, was at the 4th heaven of the Nirvana realm. He had comprehended the essence of the sword art and grasped the sword force. His attainments in the sword art had reached an unimaginable level. This news would spread very quickly, and Sky Bearing Academy would become famous because of it. More and more geniuses would come to Sky Bearing Academy because of its reputation. Lin Yuan's eyes were filled with annoyance. Wang Yefeng, Fang Shanhai, and the rest had gloomy expressions and complicated emotions. The students of the Earth Palace Sword Art 3 divisions were all in high spirits and extremely excited. A peerless genius. The Azure Water Academy's Sword Art Vice Head instructor stared at Chu Mu with glowing eyes. Little friend, I am the Azure Water Academy's Sword Art Vice Head instructor, Su Jinkai. Our Azure Water Academy has been established for 3,000 years. We have a long history and a deep foundation. Furthermore, we are directly under the Azure Water Empire's royal family and have a bright future ahead of us. Our Azure Water Academy is thirsty for talents and is in need of a peerless genius like you. We sincerely invite you to our Azure Water Academy to be the Sword Art Head instructor. The Kanglan dynasty was established by the Kanglan Saint Emperor. It was a powerful dynasty. Although the Kanglan dynasty also paid attention to the strong, the status of officials in the dynasty was relatively high. After all, many people in this world were cultivators. Many of the officials in the dynasty were people with great strength. With powerful strength and the protection of the empire, as well as superior resources, influence, and backing, becoming an official in the empire was the dream of many. Su Jinkai was blatantly trying to poach Chu Mu, but Mu Shihua and the others couldn't say anything. Azure Water Academy was indeed much stronger than Sky Bearing Academy, and they indeed had the Azure Water Empire as their direct backing. Moreover, with Chu Mu's talent, it wasn't impossible for him to enter the imperial court and become an official. What Su Jinkai said was the truth. Mu Shihua felt that he had no reason to stop Chu Mu. That would be destroying his future. After all, even the Sky Bearing Academy's vice head instructor couldn't be compared to the Azure Water Academy's Sword Art Head instructor to a certain extent. Everyone looked at Chu Mu quietly. The two vice heads of the Azure Water Academy looked at Chu Mu with smiles. From their expressions, it was obvious that they were confident that Chu Mu would agree. This was related to one's future, who would reject it. However, he couldn't figure out Chu Mu's background. If he knew, he probably wouldn't have invited him and might even make a move. Thank you for your kind intentions, but I don't want to leave the Sky Bearing Academy now. We'll talk about it in the future, Chu Mu said indifferently. Instantly, everyone was stunned. Rejected. Faced with such a huge temptation, he actually rejected it. Unbelievable! Everyone was dumbfounded. You! Su Jinkai's expression changed. Just as he was about to berate Chu Mu, he suddenly thought of something. He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. Then, he said in a deep voice, "Little friend, this is a rare opportunity. If you miss it, it will be gone. I've made up my mind." Chu Mu couldn't be bothered to say anything else. All right, the doors of the Azure Water Academy are always open to you. Su Jinkai could only say this in the end. If it was someone else who rejected him, they would definitely anger him and not give him any face. However, he didn't dare to do this to Chu Mu. A person at the initial stages of the fourth sky of Nirvana Realm, who had mastered sword force and defeated a sixth sky of Nirvana Realm opponent who had also mastered sword force. It was hard to say what a person like this would achieve in the future, but it was best not to make him an enemy. Regretfully, this year's Academy exchange had come to an end. Just as everyone was about to leave, Lin Yuan opened his mouth and announced that Chu Mu would be the head instructor of the sword arts in the Sky Bearing Academy. In fact, this was what everyone wanted. Chu Mu also wanted to enter the upper echelons of the book collection department, but he needed to have enough status. The position of head instructor of the sword arts in the academy was enough. "Instructor, are you not going to teach us anymore?" Jiang Yun asked. "I will still teach you swordsmanship," Chu Mu replied. Actually, the head instructor of the sword arts in the academy was just a position. Basically, after taking up this position, there was no need to teach anymore. However, Chu Mu didn't mind. He would teach once every 3 days for 8 hours. Although it was said that he was teaching others, he was actually learning his own swordsmanship. There were more or less benefits to it. Hearing Chu Mu's words, Jiang Yun and the rest were very happy. Even the indifferent Chun Li let out a smile. The people from the other academies left. Soon after, the news spread. The limelight of this exchange was completely overshadowed by Chu Mu. However, no one was dissatisfied. Instead, they were very excited. This was because they had personally witnessed the battle between two peerless geniuses who had mastered sword force. That kind of shock was indescribable. One by one, the genius students even had the thought of giving up on spells and focusing on swordsmanship. There were even a few hot-headed geniuses who did so. As for what they would achieve in the future, it would depend on their own luck. After the exchange, everyone returned. After Chu Mu and Mu Shihua chatted for a while, they also exchanged a few words with Lin Yuan before heading to the Academy's book collection department to enter the upper level. Lin Yuan was very helpless, but he didn't know what to say. He still remembered the words he had said in front of Chu Mu. Under the circumstances back then, those words might not have been much, but now that he thought about it, those words were filled with humiliation. If he were in Chu Mu's shoes, it would be good enough if he didn't get angry. How could he expect to be polite? He could only wait and slowly mend their relationship. Lin Yuan thought to himself. He didn't know that he wouldn't have the chance to do so. Amazing, it was really too amazing. I didn't expect our instructor's swordsmanship to be so profound. It's unimaginable. Sword force, he has actually mastered sword force. In the future, he will definitely be a sword saint, and a powerful one at that. A sword saint. All the students revealed envious gazes. Jiang Yun clenched his fist and said, I have decided. In the future, I will spend more time cultivating swordsmanship. In the deep blue world, spells were more prosperous than swordsmanship. Under normal circumstances, spells were also more powerful than swordsmanship. However, sword saints subverted this concept. Sword saints were very strong, and their swordsmanship was also stronger. It wasn't inferior to spells at all. This was because sword saints mastered sword force, and sword force could increase the power of swordsmanship. As for spells, there was no such thing as arcane power. Chapter 1329. Instructor Chu Mu, I want to be your disciple. Please accept me. Chun-Li knelt down and kowtowed to Chu Mu. His tone was very firm. This was the 10th time Chun-Li requested to be Chu Mu's disciple. However, this was the first time he knelt to Chu Mu. Before Chu Mu could stop him, Chun-Li had already kowtowed 3 times. Every time he kowtowed, his head would hit the ground and make a thumping sound. When he got up, Chun-Li's forehead was slightly red. Although he wasn't a body cultivator, Chun-Li's body was much stronger than the average person after many upgrades. The red mark on his forehead meant that he used a lot of strength. He was very sincere. Chu Mu had a headache. Chun-Li's talent in swordsmanship was not bad, but it could only be considered above average. There was still a gap between him and those peerless geniuses. However, he was very sincere. If he was in the human race's 4 major star fields, Chu Mu wouldn't hesitate. However, in the deep blue world, he was only here to carry out a mission. Chun-Li, you have some talent and sincerity. However, I still can't accept you as my disciple. Chu Mu thought for a while and said slowly, however, I can accept you as an in-name disciple first. Hearing Chu Mu's words, Chun-Li first showed a disappointed expression before it turned into a pleasant surprise. An in-name disciple was still a disciple after all. Master, please accept this disciple's 3 kowtows. Chun-Li quickly kowtowed 3 more times. I don't have much time. Therefore, other than teaching swordsmanship, I won't teach you often. Chu Mu said honestly. I understand, Master. As long as you can guide me, I will learn diligently. Chun-Li didn't show any dissatisfaction. Okay, you can go back first and cultivate well. Chu Mu said. Okay, Master. However, before I go back, I wonder if I should give up on spells and focus on swordsmanship? Chun-Li said, hoping that Chu Mu would give him a suggestion. I won't give any suggestions. Follow your heart. Chu Mu said faintly and signaled Chun-Li to leave. Yes, master. Chun-Li turned around and left with a thoughtful expression on his face. The concept of magic was deeply rooted in people's hearts, and it was also one of the mainstream developments in this world. It had its own uniqueness. As for what would happen in the end, Chu Mu didn't know, so he couldn't make any conclusions. Moreover, Chun-Li was merely a nominal disciple. Taking in Chu Mu as a disciple in name didn't affect his daily life much. He still attended sword art classes, cultivated, and went to the book collection department. Chu Mu's identity as the head instructor of the sword techniques of the Sky Bearing Academy allowed him to become one of the higher-ups of the Sky Bearing Academy. The book collection department was no longer guarded against him, and he could browse through it as he wished. The upper level of the book collection department did not have as many books as the lower level, but they were more precious than the lower level. There were even a few unique books. However, Chu Mu flipped through them one by one but did not find any information about the world spirit. However, flipping through these books had broadened his horizons, increasing his knowledge and knowledge. Because he had to cultivate, Chu Mu couldn't stay in the book collection department all the time. After more than 10 days, there were still a few books left in the upper level of the book collection department that he hadn't browsed through. In these 10 days, he had attended a few sword art classes and also taught Chun-Li a few times. Chun-Li's talent was indeed not bad, and his comprehension wasn't bad either. Every time Chu Mu gave him pointers, he could quickly comprehend it and then spend a few days to absorb it. The next time there would be some improvement. This made Chu Mu quite satisfied. In these 10 days, many people came to listen to the 3 sword techniques department in the Earth Palace. Fortunately, the training hall was big enough and Chu Mu didn't chase them away. Chu Mu's reputation also spread and resounded throughout the Kanglan Empire, causing many people to come. Some came because of his reputation and wanted to enter the Sky Bearing Academy to become Chu Mu's student, while others wanted to challenge Chu Mu to become famous. However, Chu Mu rejected all challengers and didn't even bother with them. Today, Chu Mu came to the upper level of the book collection department again. He planned to finish reading the remaining 3 books today. If he still couldn't find any information related to the power of the world, he planned to find an opportunity to leave this place. He picked up the first book and read it carefully. In less than an hour, he finished reading the book and memorized all the content. He flipped through the second book. He flipped through the third book. Reading page by page, flipping through page by page, Chu Mu suddenly paused. A sharp glint flashed through his eyes as if he had thought of something. He flipped back to a few pages and carefully read them again. There wasn't much information on this page. Chu Mu only noticed something different after reading it 3 times. The general meaning was that the greatest secret of the deep blue world was the 18 divine pearls. Collecting all 18 divine pearls would unlock the secret of this world. 18 divine pearls. The secret of the world. Chu Mu narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself thoughtfully. The content was very little. It could even be said that it was only mentioned briefly. When Chu Mu read it previously, he didn't think too much about it. It was only when he suddenly had a flash of inspiration that he went back and read it a few more times that he found some clues. However, there was too little information. The 18 divine pearls and the so-called secret of the world were just this. There wasn't anything else. This made Chu Mu confused. He couldn't be sure if the 18 divine pearls and the so-called secret of the world had anything to do with the world spirit. If it was related to the power of the world, it was worth Chu Mu to investigate. However, if it wasn't, there was no need to investigate further. However, Chu Mu couldn't be sure if it was related or not. This was the main point. After reading it again, he flipped open the pages again and read page by page. He was more careful than before and he understood every word. This time, his reading speed was much slower. In the end, he finished reading the entire book and memorized it. Other than that page, there wasn't any other information related to the 18 divine pearls and the secret of the world. After Chu Mu closed the book, he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he sat on his seat and closed his eyes. He carefully recalled the contents of every book that he had read in the book collection department. His reading volume was very large and he had read many books. Therefore, it wasn't easy to recall everything carefully. After spending half a day, Chu Mu finally finished recalling everything. He could be sure that other than that page in the book, there wasn't any other information related to the 18 divine pearls and the secret of the world. There was also no information related to the power of the world. It seems like I have to focus on the 18 divine pearls. Chu Mu thought to himself and focused on the so-called 18 divine pearls. When he left the book collection department, it was already night time. Chu Mu didn't return to his residence but went to look for Mu Shihua. 18 divine pearls? Mu Shihua was confused. Judging from his tone and expression, he didn't know anything about the 18 divine pearls at all. I just saw it when I was flipping through the books in the book collection department. I was just curious, Chu Mu said calmly with a faint smile. Mu Shihua nodded without any doubt. Vice Chairman Mu, if there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. Since he didn't get any information, Chu Mu stood up and left. Mu Shihua didn't take it to heart. I have a feeling that the transformation of the power of time will happen during this period of time. It won't be long. Then I'll wait until the power of time transforms into the laws before I bid farewell to Mu Shihua, Chu Mu thought to himself. Cultivate, continue to cultivate. Every 3 days there would be a sword technique lesson. After that, Chun-Li would come over every 1 or 2 days. Chu Mu would also use his free time to give him some pointers. As a result, Chun-Li's swordsmanship gradually improved and he was even further away from the other students. However, Chun-Li was still a long way from comprehending the essence of swordsmanship and mastering sword energy. It seemed hopeless for him to master sword energy in the lower or middle levels of the Nirvana realm. Chu Mu would also take some time to write a book on swordsmanship. He planned to leave Sky Bearing Academy soon and give this book to Chun-Li as an explanation to his in-name disciple. After all, he wouldn't be able to give him pointers in the future. Li Qiufeng was forced to leave the Li family and go to the Skyblaze sect. With his own talent and strength, as well as the influence the Li family had in the Skyblaze sect, he quickly became a core disciple of the Skyblaze sect and had a relatively high status. However, Li Qiufeng had always been thinking about the position of the head of the Li family. Although he knew that after he became a disciple of the Skyblaze sect, the position of head of the Li family would no longer have anything to do with him, he was still unwilling to accept it. He knew that the reason he lost the position of head of the Li family and was forced to become a disciple of the Skyblaze sect was because he had committed a grave mistake. The reason for his grave mistake was that Chu Mu had killed 8 heavenly guards and 1 heavenly guard commander of the Li family, causing the Li family to suffer a great loss. Chu Mu was a person that Li Qiufeng hated the most. He swore that he would definitely take revenge on Chu Mu and make him suffer a fate worse than death. Now, Li Qiufeng was about to take his revenge on Chu Mu. He brought a few powerful cultivators from Fire God sect that belonged to the Li family and quickly left Fire God sect. He first returned to the Li family. After learning of the recent events, he gnashed his teeth in anger. He is now in the Sky Bearing Academy and is in the limelight, an elder of the Li family said viciously. Relying on the Sky Bearing Academy's support, he has completely disregarded the Li family and is lawless. Father, elders, don't worry. Li Qiufeng's eyes flashed with a cold light as he vowed, this time, I have brought a few experts from the Skyblaze sect with me. They all belong to the Li family and each of them has a profound cultivation base. With them, Chu Mu will not be able to escape. The Sky-Bearing Academy will definitely not dare to offend the Skyblaze sect and protect Chu Mu. Otherwise, they will become the Skyblaze sect's enemy. Even the founder of the Sky-Bearing Academy, the Sky-Bearing Sword Saint, would not dare to offend the Skyblaze sect. Just like that, Li Qiufeng left the Li family with a few experts from the Skyblaze sect and quickly headed for the Sky-Bearing Academy. He was fully confident that he would be able to capture Chu Mu this time. Chapter 1330. Grasping sword energy at the fourth sky of the Nirvana realm, this Chu Mu's talent is really shocking. I heard that he can even suppress a sixth sky of the Nirvana realm cultivator, and that sixth sky of the Nirvana realm cultivator has also comprehended sword energy. Grasping sword energy at the Nirvana realm means that his talent is extremely high. Being able to fight across two heavens also means that his combat talent is shocking. However, in front of absolute power, everything is in vain. Li Qiufeng sneered and said, "I believe that with your strength, it won't be difficult to capture Chu Mu. I think that it's enough for senior brother He to do it." Yeah, senior brother, he is an eighth sky of the Nirvana realm cultivator. If he makes a move, capturing him will be a piece of cake. While cultivating, Chu Mu suddenly had a feeling that his heart was palpitating, as if danger was approaching. He didn't know how to calculate, so he didn't know what exactly it was. He could only be sure that something unfavorable to him was about to happen. After pondering for a moment, Chu Mu asked someone to find Chun-Li. "This is the sword practice experience I wrote down. Comprehend it well." Chu Mu passed the sword practice experience to Chun-Li and instructed. "Master Yu." Chun-Li was stunned. He looked at Chu Mu and wanted to say something, but hesitated. "All good things must come to an end. I hope that you can cultivate well and have some achievements in the sword Dao." Chu Mu said slowly, "Besides that, remember one thing. Besides yourself, don't let anyone know that you're my registered disciple. You'll know why in the future." "Master." Chun-Li's eyes were filled with confusion. "Go and cultivate well. When we meet in the future, I'll test you. Don't let me down." Chu Mu said. Chun-Li's lips moved, but he didn't say anything in the end. He just knelt down and kowtowed to Chu Mu, then stood up and left. Danger is approaching. No matter who wants to deal with me, they'll have to pay the price. Chu Mu thought to himself. A cold light flashed in his eyes. With the sky-beheading sword in his hand, his fingers slowly slid across the blade. It was cold and ghastly. "You have two choices." Li Qiufeng sat in front of Mu Shihua and Lin Yuan with a sneer. "First, hand over Chu Mu. Second, become enemies with the Skyblaze sect." Lin Yuan and Mu Shihua's expressions changed drastically. The Skyblaze sect was a colossus to the Sky-Bearing Academy. There was no comparison between the two. Even the Sky-Bearing Sword Saint was unwilling to make an enemy out of the Skyblaze sect. After provoking the Skyblaze sect, the destruction of Sky-Bearing Academy was not far away. However, the price of not provoking the Skyblaze sect was to hand over Chu Mu. A fourth sky of Nirvana Realm Cultivator who could control sword energy, and a fourth sky of Nirvana Realm Cultivator who could suppress a sixth sky of Nirvana Realm Cultivator who could control sword energy. His future was limitless. If they handed over Chu Mu, and if Chu Mu didn't die, it would be the same as offending Chu Mu. Between offending the Skyblaze sect and offending a peerless genius with a limitless future, there was no third option. Compared to Lin Yuan, Mu Shihua was thinking more. He was the one who brought Chu Mu here. He had also promised to help Chu Mu resist the Li family, and he had done so. Chu Mu had displayed unparalleled talent and become the head instructor of the Sky-Bearing Academy's sword technique. It was time for the Sky-Bearing Academy to rise. However, the arrival of a few core disciples from the Skyblaze sect had created a huge change. Mu Shihua had three considerations. First, the development of the Sky-Bearing Academy. Second, his own promise. Third, He was optimistic about Chu Mu's future. Therefore, he was very hesitant. A cold smile hung on Li Qiufeng's lip. In reality, he could just go and find Chu Mu. However, he did this because he wanted to humiliate Chu Mu before capturing him. Wasn't he under the protection of the Sky-Bearing Academy? Then he would let the Sky-Bearing Academy expel him personally. From now on, Chu Mu is no longer an instructor of the Sky-Bearing Academy. He has nothing to do with the Sky-Bearing Academy, Lin Yuan said straightforwardly. After making this decision, he suddenly felt carefree. Chu Mu had not paid much attention to him. Even when he had put down his status as the vice head and tried to mend the relationship with Chu Mu did not care. This made him very angry. Vice head Lin Yuan. Mu Shihua's expression changed. Vice head Mu, I am doing this for the sake of the academy, Lin Yuan said righteously. I have a condition. Mu Shihua looked at Li Qiufeng and said coldly, I will inform Chu Mu now. You have to wait for Chu Mu to leave the Sky-Bearing Academy before taking action. No problem, Li Qiufeng said. Mu Shihua did this because he was worried that a battle would break out in the academy and cause damage. On the other hand, he hoped that Chu Mu would leave early. Li Qiufeng agreed because he was very confident. Mu Shihua quickly left and found Chu Mu to inform him of the situation. Young friend Chu, I am very sorry. After Mu Shihua finished speaking, he apologized sincerely. Young friend Chu, you should take this opportunity to leave. The sooner the better. Vice head Mu, you don't have to feel sorry. Even if this did not happen, I was planning to take my leave. Chu Mu said, in that case, we will meet again in the future. After he finished speaking, Chu Mu immediately left his residence and soared into the sky. He turned into a sword light and flew out of the Sky-Bearing Academy. As for Lin Yuan, he was just a petty person. If he had the chance, he would teach him a lesson. However, the current situation was clearly not suitable. Mu Shihua had told Chu Mu that among the Skyblaze sect disciples, there was an 8th heavenly layer Nirvana realm martial artist, 3 7th heavenly layer Nirvana realm martial artists, and 1 5th heavenly layer Nirvana realm martial artist. Chu Mu did not care about the 5th heavenly layer Nirvana realm martial artist. However, the 3 7th heavenly layer Nirvana realm martial artists and 1 8th heavenly layer Nirvana realm martial artist were worthy of Chu Mu's attention. Mu Shihua looked at Chu Mu's departing figure and sighed heavily. His eyes dimmed. Such an unforeseen event was completely unexpected. Chu Mu turned into a sword light and flew out of the Sky-Bearing Academy. Unexpectedly, Li Qiufeng and the others had already moved and chased after him. Senior brothers, I'll leave it to you. Li Qiufeng's cultivation was the lowest and his speed was the slowest. He could not compare with Chu Mu at all, so he could only warn the other 4. Junior brother Li, don't worry. We will definitely capture this thief. After giving Li Qiufeng a guarantee, the 4 of them suddenly sped up and chased after Chu Mu. Chu Mu executed the flying sword control technique. His speed was extremely fast. He was like a ray of light that streaked across the sky. In a flash, he left behind a ray of light and disappeared into the distance. Let's pursue him at full speed. He Zijian, who was at the 8th heavenly layer Nirvana realm, said. Among the 4 of them, he had the highest cultivation and was the leader. As soon as he finished speaking, the 4 of them immediately moved their 10 fingers. Their nimble fingers sketched out different seals. 4 different colored rays of light bloomed. Immediately, the rays of light spread out and enveloped the 4 of them. Suddenly, a dragon's roar was heard. The rays of light mixed and stretched, forming a gray flood dragon. The flood dragon was huge. The 4 of them hid in its head and body. With the combination of the 2 arts, their speed increased by several times. With a whoosh, they cut across the sky and chased after Chu Mu, getting closer and closer. Feeling the movement behind him, Chu Mu was shocked. He did not expect that spells could be used in this way. The speed of these people was already very fast. Now they were even faster than him. Looking at the situation, it seemed that there was no way to get rid of these people. Then, let's fight. Let's fight to our heart's content. His body suddenly stopped. The sky-beheading sword appeared in his hand. Without any mercy, he executed the thunder prison break. Thunder roared and lightning flashed. Under the storm, the scorched earth spread. Terrifying lightning appeared in the sky and locked on to He Zijian and the other three, crazily striking down. Chu Mu's attack was too sudden. The lightning struck down and shattered the Grey Flood Dragon. However, with the protection of the Grey Flood Dragon, the four of them were not injured. Capture! He Zijian shouted. His 10 fingers moved quickly. Suddenly, a terrifying aura surged around his body. The sound was so loud that it seemed like an invisible ocean had appeared. Immediately, a vast blue tide appeared behind He Zijian. As the tide surged, 2 blue rays suddenly shot out. They were like the tentacles of an octopus. They quickly flung towards Chu Mu, trying to entangle Chu Mu. The other 3 pulled out their swords and quickly slashed the sword light. Then, their left hands performed seals. Spells emerged and all of them blasted towards Chu Mu. The techniques cast by 7th and 8th level Nirvana realm cultivators were extremely powerful. Chu Mu had no choice but to treat them seriously. In his heart there was also a kind of excitement. Sword intent gushed out. That terrifying sword intent wasn't held back at all, instantly causing the void to tremble. He Zijian and the other 3's expressions couldn't help but change. They all had comprehended sword intent, but compared to Chu Mu's sword intent, it was like comparing a firefly to the moon. In front of this sword intent, they didn't know why, but they actually had a feeling of trembling. Kill him! He Zijian made a prompt decision. He realized that Chu Mu was a terrifying enemy. They couldn't capture him alive. They had to kill him on the spot to prevent any unforeseen events from happening. Suddenly, the 2 dark blue whips that were flung towards Chu Mu suddenly straightened. A ray of light flashed on them. They were as sharp as swords. Since they had decided to kill Chu Mu, the 4 didn't hold back anymore. They cast their spells and sword arts. The power was shocking. Chu Mu cast Wind Rise and Thunderfall. Then, he released the metal force field. Golden rays of light appeared on the sky-beheading sword. It was incomparably dazzling. 5 elements sharp metal sword. The sword light that could cut through everything was unstoppable. It slashed towards one of the 7th sky of Nirvana realm cultivators. Under the enhancement of the metal force field, it became very terrifying. The 4 of them hurriedly released their respective force field. Unfortunately, their force fields couldn't be merged. They could only act independently. The terrifying golden sword light of the 5 elements sharp metal sword was dozens of meters long. It seemed to cut through the sky. It was shocking. Under the support of the sword intent without holding back, the power of the sword had reached its peak. Once it hit, even if it was a Nirvana artifact with a soaring cultivation, it wouldn't be able to withstand it and would die immediately. The others attacked the golden sword light one after another. They weakened the power of the golden sword light and saved the 7th sky of Nirvana realm cultivator. This made Chu Mu feel that it was a pity. The sword attack just now was unexpected. If it was effective, it would reduce one of the threat. Now that the opponent was prepared, it was difficult to be effective.